Digimon is a series that has been near and dear to my heart for 20 years. Though I'm an adult now, the franchise continues to be something that fills up much of my time, thoughts, and energy to the point where anyone who can claim to be a friend of mine has heard me go off on a Digimon rant. I've even jokingly been called the nickname the Digimon Queen by friends of mine on a Discord server. At least I think it was joking. But there are so many more people out there who claim their undying love and devotion to Lord of the Rings, Star Trek Wars, Avatar The Last Airbender, you name it. And it's a beautiful thing to me. These franchises have helped them in a variety of ways. So it's a special love. Digimon is mine. I'm not easily someone who actively participates in fandom, preferring to stand on the periphery and absorb what the fandom gives me, enjoying the series in my own way. I've joined the Digimon roleplay community on Tumblr as my favorite character. I'm writing a long, ongoing AU fanfic. I've sat and watched the Pokemon Digimon debates and every reference made by anyone who mentions Digimon as that Pokemon knockoff. It's actually hilariously ridiculous the number of times I've talked to someone about the series who has uttered the words that Pokemon knockoff, to the point where my reaction is a bit of a lighthearted joke between me and my friends, who are dragged along for the ride as I go off on a long explanation. But it made me curious, as I was always doubtful that was true. Oh, the things that get accomplished with salt. Upon learning more about the franchise I love so much, I found myself wanting to share it more. Fear of starting something new, getting information wrong, all my hard work going to waste, have been fears that I've had along the way. But I'm also someone who has difficulty getting things that I want to do done, which is why this project has been years in the making. But I feel as the Digimon franchise has seen a full revival in the last 5 or 6 years, it's time I put myself out there. That being said, I'm Twilight Guardian, this is Takara. Let's talk about Digimon. Strap yourselves in, people, this is going to be a deep dive. I say that, but let's take a step back for a moment and talk about the beginning of the monster craze, and it all started with I'm kidding. It started with Godzilla. What? Godzilla? Please bear with me. There is quite a few things to go over before we actually talk about Digimon proper. It will all be relevant, I promise. He is called King of the Monsters for a reason. This creature is known as a kaiju, which translates to strange beast. There are different categories of kaiju, and specifically Godzilla falls into the Dai Kaiju or Great Kaiju category. Tai, or Dai, meaning large or big. Godzilla and other kaiju monstrosities have a distinctly Shinto feel to them, with its themes of monsters, nature, the environment, and the effects of human impact on the world around them. In Shintoism, there are creatures called kami, born from everything in nature around us, from inanimate objects to animals to plants. Now, kami translates directly into English as gods, although the word isn't quite accurate. Spirits are more accurate terminology, although they are still worshipped and respected as gods. Shinto teaches respect for and balance with nature. As being within and products of nature, we must acknowledge the power it holds over us and how we infect the environment. The movie monsters of the kaiju franchise represent elements of nature that cannot be controlled and have abilities humans could scarcely comprehend. Godzilla himself represents a water dragon from Shinto mythology, being a lizard associated with water. There are many more creatures in the kaiju mythos that have ties to other Japanese mythological creatures, such as Ghidorah, taking inspiration from the Yamato no Orochi. There are themes of Shinto nature spirits being woken up by the atomic bomb to punish the humans for falling out of balance with and damaging nature. Shinto kami can be both benevolent and malevolent, helping humans or hurting them. This is seen with Godzilla being an antagonist in the first film, with many subsequent films showing the beast being a protector of Japan from other monstrous threats. Although it is always shown that Godzilla is not protecting humans necessarily, but Japan as its territory. It is a wild animal, not a pet or friend or having any claim or ownership by humans. It is a creature that humans must acknowledge, respect, leave be, and hopefully the respect is mutual that Godzilla will continue to cause less damage and protect Japan and its people. Kaiju itself is a subgenre of tokusatsu, special filming entertainment. Although Godzilla himself can't truly be called the first kaiju technically, as the term encompasses predecessors like King Kong and the Rhedosaurus from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Godzilla is the trendsetter for the genre we know today as kaiju. Kaiju is a big genre in Japan, spanning hundreds of films, TV shows, comics, manga, and video games. Properties of kaiju ranging from King Kong, Godzilla & Co., Ultraman, Cloverfield, Pacific Rim, Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and Neon Genesis Evangelion. Many of these early genre giants were inspired by or directly metaphor for the atomic bomb and fears of nuclear weapons and fallout following post-World War II. Even so, the popularity of these giant monsters persisted for generations within the country. Outside of it, only extremely popular properties such as Godzilla or Super Sentai, renamed Power Rangers, are known widely to Western audiences. Western movies influenced by kaiju properties include Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park's and Jaws films, and Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, taking inspiration from Godzilla King of the Monsters and A Warning from Space, respectively. While the mid-90s monster craze wasn't directly inspired off of its predecessors in the 50s, you should now have a base understanding for the kind of atmosphere that birthed properties of this era in Japan. So, what was all part of it? It just started with Pokemon, right? With everything coming after it being a knockoff trying to cash in on Pokemon's popularity, right? Not exactly. It turns out the elements of what made Pokemon popular, the Monster Collection, were already gaining traction in Japanese media. That's not to downplay the importance or impact Pokemon has had around the world by any means. Pokemon itself wasn't a trendsetter, but it was the catalyst for making the trend a full-on craze. Most of the franchise's association with the monster craze have only scarce similarities to Pokemon. Before we move on, I also want to emphasize my definition of a knockoff, as it can be different for different people. What I consider a knockoff or a ripoff is the originality factor to the property in question. For Pokemon, having monsters in the game is a broad enough topic, so much of the battle system, overall gameplay, overworld graphics, or sprites would have to be similar. Simply having monsters or some creature in the world and fighting in a tournament, especially in a Japanese product, isn't enough. Or else any high fantasy that features elves or dwarves would be considered a Tolkien ripoff regardless if the content of the novel is vastly different. Tolkien didn't invent elves or dwarves. There's also a difference between ripping off and inspiration or even homage. And in that regard, creators can just be honest that they were inspired by properties that came before, and there should be no shame in that. Nor should it mean that it's ripping off or copying. Godzilla was inspired by the Rhedosaurus from the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, an ancient dinosaur woken up from its slumber by an atomic bomb to wreak havoc on the modern-day human population. Sound familiar? The Rhedosaurus was in turn inspired by the 1953 version of King Kong and growing concern with nuclear weapons, and it was decided to combine these two aspects. Godzilla creators Ishiro Honda and Tomoyuki Tanaka were big fans of the film and used it as inspiration for creating Godzilla, which would eventually inspire the 1998 American version of Godzilla, which brought Godzilla back to its roots by inserting it into the role of the Rhedosaurus. Seriously, Godzilla 1998 just took the plot from Fathoms. From unleashing a giant lizard into the modern era, said lizard destroying a fishing boat, then a coastal structure, to emerging in New York and the same dock, looking for a place to breed, all the while being pursued by a scientist who has nothing to do with the creature in question. They both leave giant holes in buildings! Both monsters evade the military until Nightfall, where they have a showdown with the beast who escapes but for a blood sample where a new threat is discovered, and finally the creature is brought down for good at a New York landmark. Godzilla 1998 is monster history inception. The original Godzilla movie was able to make the concept into its own thing without merely copying Fathoms. That, I think, is the most important part. Making it your own. Wow, that was a tangent. Back on topic. I'm not usually one to say things like that without backing myself up with receipts, so let's go through not only what were considered part of the monster craze, but all media that held similar elements from this time period. While Pokemon is considered the most famous monster franchise of the 90s, it's actually not the first. That would belong to Megami Tensei, or Shin Megami Tensei as it's known in the West. Technically, the game came out originally as Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei on September 11th, 1987 in Japan based off of a novel of the same name. It features gameplay where you make contracts with demons to join your party. The demons themselves normally have something to do with computers, such as being summoned by a computer program or reaching out to humans through email, dreams, computers, or television. In order to gain stronger demons, you fuse them together to create new demons. The sequel would come out April 6, 1990. Development for the game started after the release of the initial game, and the third game, Shin Megami Tensei, would be released October 30th, 1992, dropping the Digital Devil title. December 23, 1992 saw the release of the series' first spin-off title, Last Bible, meant to be a toned-down, friendlier version for a wider audience, featuring monsters in a fantasy world instead of demons. Another spin-off series called Majin Tensei would spawn 5 titles, starting with the titular game releasing January 28, 1994. Shin Megami Tensei 2 would come out starting March 18, 1994, followed closely by If in October, which would partially inspire the setting and elements for the more famous spin-off, Persona. The Devil Summoner series started with Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner, released December 25, 1995, and finally Revelations Persona was released September 20, 1996. Persona is the only series listed here to come out after the release of Pokémon. Even the Dragon Quest games featured mild monster recruitment mechanics in games such as Dragon Quest V, September 27, 1992, and is considered one of the earliest examples of this mechanic after Megami Tensei. In it, you would follow the hero through most of his childhood and early adult life, and early on you would get the first monster companion in the form of a great saber cat. Though when the hero becomes an adult, he'll obtain a wagon that will allow him to store party members in. With an explanation, he'll recruit monsters after battle and defeating them. Recognizing the hero's strength, they will come to admire him and want to work under him as a lackey. Gaining monster companions seems to rely on luck, the player's level, and chance. This wouldn't be expanded until Dragon Quest Monsters in 1998, where monster recruitment is the base feature of the game. Though by this time Pokemon had already come out, and as most reviewers in the West, I can only guess, were ignorant of everything surrounding this trend, criticized it for being a Pokemon knockoff. Perhaps they may have thought that it would be successful because of Pokemon, but it seems a bit silly to me that a Genesis franchise of this genre's spin-off would be considered a knockoff. Monster collection games or elements were certainly not unheard of prior to Pokemon. It's just that Pokemon happened to be the game that broke into the international market and into the mainstream. In fact, Dragon Quest V, along with the Megami Tensei series, could be a small inspiration to Pokemon. Dragon Quest Monsters follows a boy named Terry who enlists the help of monsters to look for his kidnapped sister. At the same time, the denizens of the monster world require Terry to help rescue them from some dark evil. In order to help your sister, you need to win the Starry Night tournament with the monsters you've bred and trained. Monsters can only breed at level 10 or higher, and personalities can affect the breeding process. Monsters can be recruited by using monster meat, or they'll decide they want to join you rarely of their own volition. The game otherwise follows the more RPG elements of most Dragon Quest games, just with the focus mainly being the monsters themselves. Pokemon was the passion project of Satoshi Tajiri, a founder and employer of the arcade fanzine turned video game company, along with his friend and business partners Ken Sugimori and Junichi Masuda. Pokemon was conceived as capsule monsters in 1990, inspired by Tajiri's hobby of catching and collecting bugs as a child. It was likely a charisma-inspired game that more heavily focused on the chance and gacha aspect so popular in Japan. The name was inspired by Japanese gashapon machines, where the toys were held prisoner by plastic balls. Due to a combination of copyright, marketing woes, and Japan's love for splicing English words together, capsule monsters became Kapumon, which eventually was traded out to pocket monsters and thus Pokémon. The poke is short for pocket. In Japanese, that sounds like poketo. The Japanese pronunciation gives the slight differentiation between the O and the E stress, which is why many fans cringe at the pronunciation of Pokemon. Capsule Monsters was initially rejected by Nintendo, leading to further revision of the name and concepts within the game to a more battle-oriented style of gameplay. I wonder if there was any influence behind that decision. Much of the game was done with an incredibly tight budget, and many of Tajiri's work hours were unpaid in order to finish the game. It finally released February 27, 1996, and was an overnight success. Monster Rancher, called Monster Farm in Japan, was likely already in development in 1996 and released November 30th, 1997. Keep in mind that game development in the modern day can take anywhere between 2 to 10 years, depending on the size of the project, the size of your team, and other factors such as money. Game development has only become more complicated and difficult as the technology grows. In the 70s and 80s, it may have been possible for a single person to create a game in a month or even a week. By this time in the 90s, the average development time for a game, excluding marketing, was about 1.5 to 3 years, if nothing went wrong. And well, it's technology. Stuff goes wrong sometimes. Unfortunately, there isn't much information available for the game series' development or creation. Monster Rancher's focus was more on the raising of monsters for battle and juggling gaining money, raising your monster stats, feeding them items, being more in line with early Digimon console games, which would start coming out a year later. The unique feature of the game and the seeming inspiration for the series was the gimmick of inserting compatible CDs into the PlayStation or PS2 to generate new monsters to raise. This is why the monsters are designed the way that they are. Simplistic and easy for palette swapping and basic limb attachments for bred monsters from two parents of different species. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time such mechanics have been seen in a breeding game, and I haven't seen it since until the more recent Tamagotchi games. Fans of Pokemon have been creating breeding variants for years, but there are so many Pokemon and so many possible combinations, there would have to be thousands of unique models, which is likely why the developers of Monster Rancher developed with the limitations that they did. Despite 14 games, the last one came out in 2011, and the series has gone largely dormant. Despite that, the Switch is getting a Monster Rancher on its system, though it is a port of the original game, not a remake. Odd choice if you ask me, but it is likely a cautious move to see how available the market is for a franchise revival. Though it has been released in Japan, it doesn't look like it's getting a global release anytime soon. Other games came out around this time, like the rather generically named card game Monster Collection, which came out in 1997. It would get a PlayStation role-playing game of the same name in October 28, 1999, called Monster Collection Kamen no Modoshi, Masked Mage, where you follow a young man, default named Robin, on his quest to win a card tournament. Apparently the video game's card system is nothing like how the actual card game is played, which seems par for the course for TCG products if Yu-Gi-Oh! Is anything to go off of. It's considered more ADV, adventure, than RPG, with dungeon crawling elements seem to be the main focus of the game, advancing through with card battles. Monster Collection would eventually spawn a manga and eventual anime in 2000 called Melancholy Nights. In 2000, Monster Collection 2 was released, but it seems that's all there was for the series. It was purchased by another company from its original in 2011, but it's otherwise out of print. As far as I'm aware, only the anime and manga have been brought anywhere outside of Japan. A rather lazy PlayStation game came out in either 1998 or 1999 called Monster Complete World. It's a game where you go out, battle monsters, and capture them to add them to your battle party. It's turn-based, with the monster using up balls of energy in their attacks and needing to replenish them in order to use more attacks in the next round. Once again, the goal is to win a tournament, being held at the end of the game. The majority of the designs look rather generic RPG, with many of the creature designs looking like normal animals, although it did get a single sequel in 2000 called Densetsu Kemono no Ana, Monster Complete World version 2, Legendary Beast Hole, or Hole of the Legend Monster. Quite the mouthful, I know. This series faded into obscurity, and there is practically no information I can find on it. Cardia, The World of Fate, March 26, 1998, and Final Fantasy Tactics, June 20, 1997, were also games that had monster recruitment elements in them as well. Cardia is an interesting game, a Square Enix product with the same artist as Final Fantasy, Yoshitaka Amano. So one might think that it's a Final Fantasy game, but from my knowledge it's not. It's an RPG game where you can use the magic of the world to create phantoms to do battles. With Cardia, you have an invite system where monsters can join you to get better item drops from the same family of monsters. With Final Fantasy Tactics, you can recruit monsters, breed them for better attacks and stats, as well as chocobos. We can also include Clamp's Cardcaptor Sakura in this camp too, considering the plot revolves around the capturing and subduing of monsters in the form of spirits inhabiting cards created by a wizard. The original manga came out in May of 1996, and is the only shoujo example we have. Although it is a shoujo, sometimes the cards and adventures took a backseat to the personal relationships of the series. Some might argue that the original English dub of the anime was meant to cash in on Pokemon's popularity, though I'd say it's less about competing with Pokemon and more about marketing to boys. There wasn't a thought that Cardcaptor Sakura would be successful if it was aimed at girls, and there was a small male market for the Sailor Moon due to the combat elements, so the show was cut to appeal more to both boys and girls. Beyblade is another franchise that came out as a toy in July of 1999, and were based on Beigoma, a traditional Japanese spinning top that became popular in the 17th century Edo period. It was made with spiral seashells, later to be made out of metal. When spun correctly, they made humming sounds and are usually wrapped up in cords to launch the toy. Whichever Beigoma would stay standing the longest would be the winner. They peaked in popularity in the early 20th century, but as post-war toys became available, fell out of favor. There was also an American game in the 1960s called Battletops. Beyblade mostly took its inspiration from Beigoma, adding a decorative plate in the middle for aesthetics. The manga that would release 2 months later added the concept that these plates were spirits called Bit Beasts. The anime based off of the manga would release January 8th, 2001, and even into a couple of video games. As we'll soon learn, it actually follows in Digimon's footsteps in how it expands the franchise. But Beyblade is first and foremost a toy brand. You might think Battle Beat-em-on, April 2002, was inspired off of Beyblade, but switching out spinning tops for marbles. But the series was initially going to be inspired off Bomberman before dropping that to become its own thing. Bakugan Battle Brawlers might have been inspired off of Beyblade, being conceived as a toy franchise in 2006, but releasing the same year as the anime in 2007. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also counted in the monster craze era, despite being otherwise wholly disconnected from the themes, plots, and events of other games apart from the monster aspect. It started as a manga September 30th, 1996, where the story would feature many different games in an episodic fashion. Duel Monsters, or Magic and Wizards as it was called originally, a reference to Magic the Gathering, was featured. Manga author Kazuki Takahashi received fan mail and letters of interest in the game that he decided to expand on it. Starting from chapter 60 of his manga series, the focus would shift more explicitly to the card game known as Duel Monsters. This would also lead to the card game. The original anime by Toei that aired in 1998, named by fans as Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0, focused more heavily on the original series elements, in which each episode focused on different games and punishing the loser in some way for their terrible behaviors and actions. The redone anime Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters that came out in 2000 focused more on the rebranded elements of the series, the card game. This has much more to do with the explosion of interest in TCGs than anything to do with Pokemon. Further away from the monster collection and more into general supernatural companions is Medabots, releasing November 28, 1997. And we can also include Mega Man Battle Network and its accompanying anime, Mega Man Anti-Warrior. They're known respectively in Japan as Medarot and Rockman X. Or, because there's already a Rockman X that's a sequel to classic Rockman.exe. No wonder they changed the name for the English, that shit's confusing. Only in Japan. Medabots takes place in the near future, where robot companions have been developed for humans as servants, and children mainly use them for battle. There are tournaments for people to battle their robots and become the Medabot battle champions nationally and internationally. The game is, well, it reminds me of Pokemon in a lot of its aesthetics. The town, trees, Hikaru's room, even the town map all give very strong Pokemon vibes. But I'm not a Game Boy expert, so I don't really know how common these design choices are for the time. But I was sure that the look of the overworld was a uniquely Pokemon thing, keeping it all the way to X and Y until the inclusion of full console 3D. This and the fact that the game came out with two versions, Kabuto and Kuwagata, for trading with friends, it feels like Medabots was actually made into cashing on Pokemon's popularity. I'm not accusing this game of being a Pokemon knockoff, it's not really my goal to pick out what is, but through my brief playthrough, the design similarities surprised me. The gameplay itself at least departs from these similarities by guiding the player along by means of villagers and important characters giving clues to what they'll be doing, rather than guiding the player along by means of a linear map. The main objective is to explore the town, beat the evil organization, the Robo-Robo Gang, and become the Medabot tournament champion. When the player battles, the Medabot has 4 movesets, each tied to a specific part of their body, and with varying levels of accuracy and power. When an armor piece is destroyed, that player loses that weapon option for the rest of the battle. If the head is destroyed, even with the remaining HP, the battle is won. While Pokemon's price for losing a battle is money, and many other games the price is usually some items being stolen, the penalty for losing in Medabots is parts of your robot. This is the main way of collecting the different parts throughout the game. The main feature being mixing and matching to find the perfect combination for speed, strength, defense, and compatibility with the metal, or core consciousness of the Medabot. The series would see popularity with its anime in July of 1999, a few months after Digimon's airing, and it would forever shift the franchise into mostly using the main character for the anime, Ikki Tenryou. However, out of the 13 mainline games and 15 spin-offs, only 3 games were ever released outside of Japan: Medabots, Medabots AX, and Medabots Infinity. The middle one is the only game to never be released in Japan, though a nearly identical version, Medarot G, was released instead. Recently, there has been a revival of sorts of Metabots with its Digimon collaboration. 2 years in a row, Digimon and Metabots have collaborated in April Fool's jokes, turning Digimon into Metabots and jawgressing Metabots into Digimon, even releasing some merchandise with the collaboration like the Metabots Metaroch revival version, that come with the Digimon information memory card to use with the new Digimon Vital bracelets that have come out late last year. I'll go more in depth about this once we reach the modern days in the timeline. For now, let's move on to the next franchise. Mega Man Battle Network was released March 21st, 2001 and strays a bit further away from the Monster Collection elements. It's similar to Metabots in that instead of multiple monsters, every person has a personal NetNavi, a digital companion and servant to help them with all their online and digital needs, as well as using them for combat and, you guessed it, tournaments. It's an RPG with an ongoing story through all 5 games. Actually, I'm kidding about the tournaments. They aren't as big of a factor in the games, though they do appear a few times. Due to the similarities between the franchises, Digimon and NetNavis have a lot of overlapping traits, being battle-oriented e-companions with upgrades, viruses, chips, and all of that electronic goodness. The anime Mega Man Anti-Warrior would premiere a year later, on March 4th, 2002. Angelic Layer is another series nearly identical to Battle Network, with robotic dolls called Angels. It's also set in the same universe as Chobits, so we can probably add Chi to the list if we need to. Angelic Layer came out in July of 1999, though magazine debut may have been as early as January. The anime would come out April 2001. Going back to monster collecting, Keitai Denju Telefang is a latecomer into the craze and definitive Pokemon knockoff, having come out November 3rd, 2000. Though I'm hesitant to call it merely a knockoff because I've created this series to prove Digimon isn't a knockoff, and the franchise itself has many unique and interesting elements to it. Ultimately, ideas are just that, and what is a similar theme and what is a lazy cash grab comes down to the amount of creativity in shuffling the elements around and adding a new flair. Mainly, I call it a knockoff due to the marketing. It was released with 2 games on the Game Boy Color, Power and Speed. The box designs and dual game for the trading feature of the games reflected Pokemon's methods of selling copies for friends to play with. Like with both Pokemon and Digimon being portmanteaus of the words pocket, digital, and monster, Telefang also uses this popular Japanese trend. Keitai Denwa means mobile phone in Japanese, while Ju is the word for an animal, or in this case monster. Telefang is a portmanteau of telephone and fang, referencing the use of mobile phones that are used heavily throughout the series by the humans and monsters themselves. The monsters are called Denju and they live in the Denju world, which is separated by a curtain of darkness. Humans can travel between the world with special mobile phones called D-shots, picking up on electric signals from antenna trees. The Denju are sentient with the ability of human speech, and even the use of technology. They use the mobile phone D-shots to battle each other. They befriend the humans known as T-Fangers, people who specialize in handling and befriending the Denju. They're the equivalent of Pokemon's trainers and Digimon's tamers. Like with Pokemon and Digimon, Denju have type matchups in a rock-paper-scissors chain. Forest, aquatic, desert, grassland, mountain, sky to forest again. Denju battles are 3-on-3, which can make up for any typing weaknesses and make battles more interesting. Denju also can level up and their move pool changes as they grow. They can also evolve using several methods. The most common is natural evolution, which will occur after a Denju reaches a certain level. Usually it's the longest to achieve, and it is the best stat-wise. The second method is fusion evolution, which fuses Denju and man-made items. The final method is lab evolution, where they evolve from DNA samples from specific Denju. Keitai Denju Telefang got a sequel on April 26, 2002, although after this the franchise seems to have mostly died out. The series never left Japan officially, although it is actually quite famous. Or should I say infamous. Its legacy was mostly known when Chinese bootleggers took the game, stuck it in a different cartridge and box, and sold it as the infamous fake games Pokemon Diamond and Jade. The series has a small and very dedicated fan base outside of Japan, with an entire website dedicated to making a fan translation of the games. These translations are available for download, but are works in progress as of writing this video. Magi Nation Duel is an out-of-print card game inspired by both Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, designed to be a bridge for younger players of TCGs who are growing out of Pokemon, but for whom Magic the Gathering is still too daunting. A Canadian-Korean anime was made in 2007, but was cancelled partway through the second season. Perhaps after I'm done with this series, I'll take a deeper look into the other franchises I've previously mentioned, including Telefang. Heck knows I've already gone down a research rabbit hole making this script. That was an exhaustive list, and I likely missed a franchise or two from during the turn of the century. I didn't want to focus too much on the franchises that came midway through the 2000s or later either. While monster-themed franchises never truly went away, trickling with series like Bakugan Battle Brawlers, Dinosaur King, Slugterra, etc., can we really say that they're knockoffs or copies when they come out 15, even 20 years after the initial Pokemon boom? Maybe. At that point, I feel it's just that the monster genre is here to stay. Hopefully this has convinced you that it is very likely that no series here are ripoffs or inspired by Pokemon. But even so, with Telefang still found its own unique identity to be considered elevated from its copy status. Many of the franchises were following the general trend of monster companions and collections, one that still finds new series to join the growing list, like less closely the Monster Hunter series and more closely the Rune Factory series. I want to emphasize again that a show or franchise isn't a ripoff or knockoff or stolen or anything because it might have similar concepts to something else. Ideas cannot be stolen. In this regard, no ideas are wholly original, and like I've mentioned earlier, Pokemon likely itself wasn't wholly created purely out of the mind of Tajiri, with no outside influence from other media. We're subconsciously and even sometimes consciously influenced. It's the ways that we mold or shape our ideas from the initial media that makes them unique, fresh, and new. Even if it is merely a copy, many of these bigger franchises here have given joy to many fans across the globe, many of them sharing some success alongside Pokemon. Competition is healthy for a franchise and can help one or both flourish, and we need to get away from this idea that just because something holds similar elements doesn't automatically make it a copy or a cash grab. There are limits to how much you can take inspiration from something, sure, but the annoying trend I've been seeing most of my life has been looking at a subgenre and claiming that a single franchise has ownership of that genre, and anything after it is cashing in. All mystery novels featuring detectives are just ripoffs of Sherlock Holmes, if that were the case. It's ridiculous, and people need to calm down. And really, if they were actual ripoffs, companies and copyright holders are very keen to sue other companies and individuals for stepping on their toes. Just look at Spin Master's controversies with Screecher's Wild, Monster Hunter, and Turning Mick Hard. Don't know what those are? That's because Screecher's Wild and Turning Mick Hard aren't allowed in the Western market for breaching Bakugan's patents. You want to know what absolutely is a Pokemon knockoff that can be proven? Animorphs. Yeah, you heard me, Animorphs. Not the series, the Game Boy Color game. I mean, look at it. The battle system is absolutely a ripoff of Pokemon's and is not even part of the Monster Collection genre. And more has to do with the game devs being lazy. Ubisoft wanted to cash in on Animorphs, but didn't want to put any of the work in to make it its own thing. So it became PETA's literal nightmare, with people turning into real animals and fighting instead of fictional ones. So with all that background out of the way, can we finally talk about Digimon? Not so fast. First, we have to acknowledge what was happening in Japan around the time. The early 90s to the year 2000 was a difficult time in Japan, a period of economic stagnation where the asset price bubbles collapsed and greatly impacted the entire Japanese economy. It's colloquially known as the Lost Decade. To give a feel for how impactful this was, it's said that many Japanese policymakers continue to grapple with the consequences of the Lost Decade to this day. I'll try to keep this brief as to not go on a long, boring explanation about economics in a YouTube video about Digimon. For you Americans out there, many say that it's comparable to the US's own crash in 2008. Employment was stagnant and housing dropped by 60% and land ownership dropped by 70%. Those in their 20s at the time struggled to build lives for themselves with no guarantee of a forever job like they were promised. Those of us who are into anime are familiar with the term hikikomori, which essentially means a socially withdrawn shut-in. There are many references to those depressed, jobless, and futureless people in Japanese media, and much of the trend started with this decade. This could have fueled the monster collection trend in video games, as Japan sought reprieve or escape from the stressful economic crisis it was suffering through. Any game, book, or TV show or card game released at the time could therefore be latched onto as a means of escape from reality, and many hikikomori still heavily latch onto these properties. I believe it's possible moving through this decade that many franchises that started up in Japan were made with the insecurity and desperation in mind. At the time, many families in Japan had to move into tiny, cramped apartments, most of which had strict no-pet policies. In 1990 to 1994, Maita Aki wanted to ease the burdens of the strict housing policies on Japanese children. If they couldn't own a pet of their own to look after, she'd make one for them. The initial idea for an easy-to-carry pet may have come from a commercial watched by Akihiro Yokoi, where a little boy was struggling to carry his pet turtle on a trip, later to be scolded by his mother. He thought about how nice it would be to be able to carry a pet anywhere or to own a pet where you couldn't. Thus, the Tamagotchi was born. Sources differ on whether this concept was Maita Aki's or if it was Akihiro Yokoi's, with Maita helping with development and being the face of the branding. Either way, it was pitched to Bandai in 1995, and in October of 1996, 200 prototypes were given out to high school beta testers in Shibuya, where weeks of surveying took place before the official release in October of 1996. Tamagotchi is a portmanteau of the Japanese word for egg, tamago, and the Japanese word for watch, an egg pocket watch that can house your precious pet that you can take care of. From there, the development of the Tamagotchi was handled by Akihiro Yokoi from Wiz and others working at Bandai focusing on sales and data. Maita likely, for all intents and purposes, could be considered the mother of V-Pets. Tamagotchi's story are aliens that laid eggs on Earth to study and interact with human life. In order to survive on Earth, they are placed in an egg-like contraption. From there, it is up to the owner of the Tamagotchi V-Pet to take care of the little Tama inside. The aliens are made up from simple shapes called iconic designs, similar to Hello Kitty. Pokemon, on the other hand, uses a more energetic design known as simple. Simple allows for more details to be expressed in design than iconic, which stresses basic, normally round shapes and flat colors. Upon starting up the game, the player is given an egg. The egg hatches into babies that the player can take care of as much or as little as they want. These pets have a hunger meter and a happy meter as well as age and weight categories. Minigames can help the players keep the meters full. There is also an attention and discipline meter for behavior. The Tamas can grow from egg to child, teen, and adult versions, where they would eventually die. If no offspring are born before then, the line will cease. Which Tamagotchi stage you get depends on your level of care for the Tama. If discipline is above 75%, it will be a Type 1, whereas a 50% or lower will result in a Type 2 version of the Tama. This will affect the next stage and the ease or difficulty of getting certain adult stages. Two examples of the vintage set are as follows. Starting from the egg, the Tama would go into the second stage, Baby. For Gen 1, it hatches into Babychi. From there, it will evolve into the child stage, Maruchi, where care will begin to matter more. If you had good care and a certain level of discipline, Maruchi would evolve into the teen Tamachi. Bad care would result in the teen Kuchi Tamachi. The player continues on with either good or bad care, which will result in the evolution of one of 6 adult stages Tamagotchi. Memechi can only be achieved from evolving Tamachi with a perfect care score. Jinjirochi can be achieved with the above average care of a Type 1 Tamachi, but needs perfect care from a Type 2 Tamachi. Maskuchi evolves from Tamachi, average care from a Type 1, and above average care from Type 2. Kuchi-Pachi can evolve from either Tamachi with below average care or Kuchi-Tamachi with perfect care. Nirochi is also an adult that evolves from either average care from a Type 1 Kuchi-Tamachi or good care from Type 2 Kuchi-Tamachi. Tarakochi is a final adult that can evolve from either teen with horrible care or from Tamachi or Kuchi-Tamachi. There is a special character called Oyajichi, which can only be obtained by giving your Tama no discipline until it evolves into Masukuchi, then giving it good to perfect care. In the international version, Oyajichi was changed to Bill. Gen 2 would add new character designs, with the baby stage being Shiro Babychi, and the child stage being Tonmaruchi. The two teens, good care resulted in Tongarichi, and bad care into Hashitamachi. Mimichi was this version's perfect care adult from Tongarichi. This time, depending on the versions, the Tama can either evolve into Pochichi, in the Japanese V1 and international versions, or into Niachi with Japanese V2 version. Otherwise, both as well as the third adult, Zuzichi, require the same or average care for both conditions for both types of Tongarichi. Hashizochi takes Kuchitamachi's middling road, with both average care from Tongarichi and perfect care from Hashitamachi. Kusashi requires bad care from Tongarichi, good care from type 2 Hashitamachi, and average care from type 1. Takochi requires horrible care from both teens. Gen 2 would also give different special tamas depending on the version. Japanese V1 gave us Sekitorichi, with no discipline, to Zushichi. V2 replaced him with Charichi instead. The international version, however, replaced both with an alien-like tama called Zachi. Oddly enough, Tamagotchi stayed more strictly into the realm of V-Pets and video games until 2007 with Tamagotchi's first movie release. From there, Tamagotchi would get a series of movies and anime produced back-to-back until 2015. Only a small handful of video games would ever see international release. These included the Game Boy Tamagotchi CD-ROM for Windows 95, the DS games, Tamagotchi Corner Shops 1, 2, and 3, Tamagotchi Party On for the Wii, and several mobile games for iPod and mobile phone. It seems while Tamagotchi was a craze sensation for a while, it was a short-lasting trend, and they'd focus more on the fans that stuck around until the anniversary started rolling around. The toys were marketed both towards boys and girls, but found preferential purchases among female buyers. 60% of the buyers were female as opposed to 40% male. Not really all that much of a ratio skew, but then again, toy companies always had preference for male buyers when not directly targeting girls. Making a Tamagotchi that was more appealing to boys was how Digimon was born. The similarities to Pokemon that are noticed are thus coincidental, bolstered by the American branch of the companies when bringing the later aspects to the franchise, like the anime over in the West. I specify the American branch of Bandai facing competition with Pokemon, as none of my research into Japan's Digimon history said anything about competition with any other franchise. In fact, it seems like it was the opposite. Very early planning for the male-oriented Tamagotchi was the idea of taking dinosaurs for a stroll, and it was given names like Otokochi, and then it was changed to Capsule Zorus. But as that would infringe on other trademarked properties, they went with Digital Monster. Shortened, it would become Digimon, which there were also fears that it would infringe on the trademark of a certain franchise. But their trademark for Digimon was accepted, and it was different enough. As it was based on Tamagotchi, early designs for Digimon were cutesy, although this was about monsters that had cute designs, had elemental attacks, and designs reflecting their elements. Again, they were afraid of being too similar to the growing giant that had already taken off. Watanabe turned to comic books like Spawn and artists Simon Sisley and Mike Mignola for inspiration. Being afraid of making their products too similar to another allowed this odd freedom of having the power to make up whatever he wanted, in whatever kind of style he wanted, despite normally being scolded if differing from what's expected. As they were monsters, and the idea of monsters fighting came to mind naturally, the battle system was implemented. Cute critters that are surprisingly fearsome were some design choices kept in mind, with the frightening teeth of Tokomon taking inspiration from the Dark Crystal's Fizzgig specifically. Unless evidence is found later to prove otherwise, I have to conclude that setting up Digimon as being similar to Pokemon is a wholly American invention to try and market to children and parents. Especially since Pokemon started off as a video game franchise and Tamagotchi and Digimon started as handheld toys. The markets were very different and would stay that way for at least a year. When the anime was dubbed in America, this changed, turning the term evolved into Digivolve expressly to avoid similarities with Pokemon. Some fans prefer this change as it gives a custom feel to Digimon and its terminology. The series happening to come about at the same time and releasing soon after one another, with Monster Rancher and others, would soon spark the boon of the monster craze. Both franchises actually have more differences than not, as we'll soon learn as we start to see the world building of Digimon take shape as more products come out. It's this history that gives Digimon the distinction of being one of the few other monster properties from the monster craze of the 90s that has a clear pedigree, showing the fascinating progression from the earliest development of the franchise to the modern games. Although much like the Digimons themselves in-universe, the franchise has no actual creator. Akiyoshi Hongo is normally said to be the creator of the original concept of Digimon, but this person doesn't actually exist. They're not a real person. Rather, the name is a combination of Maitaaki, former Bandai chief Tamagotchi officer Takeichi Hongo, the character designer and animation director Nakatsuru Katsuyoshi, manga writer Hiroshi Aizawa, and illustrator Yabuno Tenya. This was done for convenience to not have to split copyright between 3 to 5 individuals. The first wave of Digimon V pets were released June 26, 1997, just under 2 months after the Pokemon TV series began. By this time, production on Digimon's own movie and TV series was already underway, and a short manga series would soon follow the release in August. Similar to their sister line Tamagotchi, Digimon required you to raise a monster from an egg through Baby, Baby 2, Child, Adult, and Perfect. In English, the names would be changed to Fresh, In Training, Rookie, Champion, and Ultimate to better reflect the idea that these creatures were made for fighting. Also, like the Tamagotchi denizens, how well or poorly you looked after your digital monster would reflect on its growth. For ease, I'll be referring mostly to the English terminology, as I expect more people will be familiar with the English terms. An exception will be Jawgrass, and in some cases, Digimental. Though if you are in the Digimon fandom long enough, it becomes very easy to switch between English and Japanese terminology depending on who you talk to. Instead of bread or candy in Tamagotchi, Digimon were fed meat and vitamins. There were 2 sets of minigames, training and battles, different from the benign game of the sister series of guessing which direction the Tama would turn. The connectivity function would also allow your Digimon to battle someone else's Digimon. Both Tamagotchi and Digimon pets would poop, and would get sick if the player didn't clear the screen of the waste. Tamagotchi could be potty trained, while Digimon usually could not, and both could be cured of sickness with medicine. Like the Tamagotchi case design, which was egg-shaped, the Digimon V pet was a box, the screen being surrounded by teeth to resemble bars to give the feel that these were wild beasts that were caged and tamed. Those who owned Digimon V pets were thus known as Tamers. Fans of the anime would be unfamiliar with this aspect of the franchise, but it was a big part of the early days of Digimon, and even the games to this day. Early versions of the Digimon V pet had background landscapes that the Digimon would look to be living in. The whole digital world inside a tiny electronic box. This helped with the custom feel of the devices, as different versions had different backgrounds that came with their own unique monsters to train. While Pokemon had a linear evolution of 1 to 3 forms starting from the base and either evolving once or twice, Digimon followed the Tamagotchi method of a web of forms. The shape outcome depended on the level and variety of care that you gave it after hatching. Thus, there was never any true line for any individual Digimon. Also, while the Tamagotchi characters were a level design known as iconic, and made to resemble children's drawings, Digimon held no such restrictions. Western comic books were taking off in Japan at the time, so artist Kenji Watanabe wanted to appeal to the harder and cool aesthetics found within, giving his concept art muscles, veins, and hard shadows. Digimon V1 Digi-Eggs hatched into Botamon, which would eventually digivolve into Koromon. From there, depending on how many care mistakes you made, 0 to 3 or 4+, Koromon could become Agumon or Betamon. From there, Agumon could become Greymon as the first exclusive Digivolution with 0 to 3 care mistakes and training more than 32 times. The second Digimon exclusive to Agumon was Tyrannomon, who required 4 or more care mistakes, training in a window of 5 to 15 times, overfeeding 3 or more times, and having 0 to 3 sleep disturbances. Devimon, or Darkmon as he was originally translated as, required 0 to 3 care mistakes but training 0 to 31 times. Marimon is the fourth option, needing 4 or more care mistakes, training 16 or more times, overfeeding 3 or more times, and 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Or, if you were really neglectful, Numemon was what you got as the final option when you met none of the other requirements. Betamon, on the other hand, if going for Devimon, required 0 to 3 care mistakes, but training a whopping 48 or more times. To get Marimon was much easier, requiring only 0 to 3 mistakes, and training 0 to 47 times. While it couldn't digivolve into Greymon or Tyrannomon, Betamon had its own exclusives. Airdramon required 4 or more care mistakes, training 8 to 31 times, overfeeding 0 to 3 times, and more than 9 sleep disturbances. Seadramon was slightly easier, needing 4 care mistakes, training 8 to 31 times, overfeeding more than 4 times, and 0 to 8 sleep disturbances. Once again, if you met none of these requirements, Betamon digivolves into Numemon. From here, it becomes more difficult as the period between Digivolution to Ultimate is longer, allowing for more opportunities for mistakes. All of the Digimon require more than 15 battles to Digivolve with a win ratio of 80% or higher. Greymon, Devimon, and Airdramon became Metal Greymon, or as he's known now, Metal Greymon Virus, or Metal Greymon Blue. That's right, Metal Greymon was originally a virus type, and the version that we see in the anime is a recolor special to Tai's Agumon. Moving on, Mamemon digivolved from Tyrannomon, Meramon, and Seadramon, and finally, the only option for Numemon was to become the cuddly Monzemon, initially translated as Teddymon. Darkmon was likely renamed to avoid religious connotations. Teddymon, however, was potentially straight-up censorship as a foreign-sounding word. And it is, because Monzemon's name is a pun on the Japanese playwright Chikamatsu Monzemon, who wrote plays for bunraku, puppet theater, in the 17th century. Many well-known Digimon that we know today were also created as fan submissions rather than designed from scratch by the design team. Many of them became main characters for the TV show down the line. Angemon, Bergermon, Kabuterimon, Frigimon, and Vegimon were all selected from fan entries for Digimon V2. This tradition of fan participation for Digimon creation still goes on to this day and is a rather important aspect of Digimon as a franchise. Releasing in December of 1997, V2 introduced us to brand new egg designs, which contained Punemon. It would quickly digivolve into Tsunomon. Just like with the last model, it now branched between 0 to 3 calls for Gabumon and 4+ calls for Lekmon. The first exclusive champion Gabumon could become is Kabuterimon. Yes, I know, weird. It requires 0 to 3 care mistakes, and you need to train it 48 times. Garurumon is the second exclusive, requiring 4+ care mistakes, training between 5 to 31 times, overfeeding 3 or more times, and 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Garurumon's a chunky boy. Angemon is the third Digivolution option with 0 to 3 care mistakes and a training allowance of 0 to 47. Frigimon, or Yukidarumon, requires 4+ calls, train more than 32 times, overfeed more than 3 times, and 0 to 6 sleep disturbances. And of course, what would Digimon be without a filth option? This version's no sleep requirements met Digimon is Vegimon. Going back to Lekmon, it shared Angemon with Gabumon, requiring 0 to 3 calls and training 48 times. It would also become Frigimon, needing 4+ calls, training 8 to 15 times, overfeeding 0 to 5 times, and more than 5 sleep disturbances. Its first exclusive Digivolution options was Bergermon, requiring 0 to 3 calls and training 0 to 47 times. Waymon is the second exclusive, needing 4+ calls, training more than 16 times, overfeeding 6 times or more, and having 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Just like before, Vegimon was there if none of these requirements were met. For Ultimates, like before, the requirement was a hefty 15 or more battles with an 80% win ratio. Skull Greymon is first on the list, digivolving from Kabuterimon, Angemon, and Bergermon. Mamemon makes a return appearance as Metal Mamemon, coming from Garurumon, Frigimon, and Waymon. Finally, Vegimon also gets a Digivolution in the form of the strange alien Vetamon. March 1998 saw the V3 released, which introduced a striped egg containing Poyomon. It digivolved into Tokomon and eventually with 0 to 3 calls became Patamon, and with 4 or more care mistakes became Kunemon. Patamon's first exclusive Digivolution was Unimon, requiring 0 to 3 calls and train a minimum of 48 times. The next exclusive was Centaurumon, requiring 4+ calls, train between 5 to 31 times, overfeed it more than 3 times, and have 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Patamon could also become Ogremon if you accumulated 0 to 3 care mistakes and trained anywhere between 0 to 47 times. Bakumon needs more than 4 care mistakes to train more than 32 times, overfeed more than 3 times, and have 0 to 6 sleep disturbances. You'd think a ghost wouldn't be that heavy. And last but not least, the filth option was Sukumon, or Skumon, whichever. Kunemon could also become Ogremon if having 0 to 3 care mistakes and trained more than 48 times. Bakemon also required more than 4 calls, but could be trained in the 8 to 15 window, overfed 0 to 5 times, and had more than 5 sleep disturbances. Getting into Kunamon's exclusives, we have Shellmon with 0 to 3 calls and 0 to 47 training requirements. Dromojimon is the second, requiring 4+ care calls to train more than 16 times, be overfed 6 or more times, and have 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Of course, if none of those were met, your partner could always become Sukamon. The 3 ultimates this time have a bit more of a theme going. Andromon was what Unimon, Ogremon, and Shellmon could digivolve into. And just like the last 2, 15 battles and an 80% win ratio is required. Giromon isn't a Mamemon, but it's still incredibly tiny. Sukamon's only option is Edamon, a Digimon that would have a rather unique place in the culture of Digimon. It was April 1998 that Bandai began holding tournaments to determine the strongest tamer. At the time of the first tournament, versions 1, 2, and 3 were all out and could compete with the entire roster of 42 Digimon. Realistically though, only the 9 ultimate levels could actually compete with a chance of winning. This tournament was known as the D1 Grand Prix, bringing to mind imagery of F1 and the karate competition K1. 2 individuals hosted the tournament that were largely unknown to Digimon fans outside of Japan. The first one was a football chest protector wearing man called Kensuke Uta, and his character Volcano Uta. Volcano Uta worked for Bandai and continued to promote Digimon until 2017, though 20 years ago claiming that he'd never stop until everyone in the world loved Digimon. His ultimate reasons for leaving were his desire to become a voice actor, feeling that he'd become too comfortable with his job and that he was no longer being challenged. He now does voices for anime and a couple of Super Sentai monsters. The second was Digimonkey, a mascot for Shonen Jump's Digimon-centric column for promoting the tournaments. Volcano Uta's character was eventually made into a Digimon called Volcamon, which is a football-themed Digimon and a volcano on its back and D1 printed in yellow on the chest piece. It would eventually get a megaform called Pile Volcamon. The tournaments were set up for regional and national championships, with children needing to win the regionals first. They were held in department stores where the toys were usually sold and were dominated by the grouping of Digimon where requirements weren't met. Monsemon, Vedamon, Edamon, Digitamamon, and X-Tyrannomon dominated these tournaments, as their groupings, known as Group L, held a 75% chance win ratio over the other groupings. They were also the hardest to obtain, their champion forms only having a 25% win ratio, and the requirements for Digimon to Ultimate being a high win ratio of 80% and 15+ battles. The struggle of raising the weakest Digimon proved to have the greatest benefits. For reference, Group A normally consisted of half of the 5 version starter sets related to the best care, and through triangular cyclone attacks. Group B's members were the ulterior Digivolutions if you had 4+ care mistakes and through lightning bolts. Group C were the desired best care, most trained champions, and through fireballs. Group D were the mistake-heavy, little trained and overfed champions. Group E were the ulterior best care, fewer trained champions. They threw boxing glove-shaped attacks. Group F were the most mistake-heavy, overfed alternatives. Group G were the poor care rookie exclusives. Group H rounded out the rest of the normal champions. Group I was the weakest group with the aforementioned 25% win ratio. Group J was the start of the ultimates. Group K held the tiniest and most alien-looking ultimates. Group L was the final group and held the strongest Digimon in the game, which were mentioned previously. Their attacks were mostly heart-shaped, and the attack titles reflected that, with names such as Lovely Serenade, Heart Attack, Unidentified Flying Kiss, and so on. This was all technically before the rock-paper-scissors triangle of virus data vaccine was implemented. Though a primitive form existed at the champion level, there was little in the way of working with it as only one Digimon could be raised at any given time. The culture of Digimon in Japan grew, and it was fostered over the internet with Bandai's Digimon channel and a Tamers chat room called Digimon Cafe, which would remain in operation until June 2003. To participate in the tournaments, the tamer had to travel to a participating department store where they'd battle workers in the store. If they won, they'd be granted a stamp in their books. When a tamer obtained all their stamps, they were allowed to participate in the Nationals, where they'd battle each other in a series of matches to determine the ultimate winner. V4 was released on May with Baby Yuramon, In-Training Taunamon, and a Good Care rookie was Biomon, while the Bad Care alternative was Palmon. Monochromon was Biomon's first exclusive Digimon and required 0 to 3 calls and to be trained more than 48 times. Cockatriemon was the second and needed more than 4 calls, trained within 5 to 31 times, be overfed more than 3 times, and have 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Leomon is the third option and first non-exclusive, requiring 0 to 3 calls and trained 0 to 48 times. Biomon could also become Kawagamon with more than 4 calls, trained more than 32 times, overfed more than 3 times, and a more generous 0 to 6 sleep disturbances. Palmon, on the other hand, held Sealamon as one of its exclusives, requiring 0 to 3 calls and training 0 to 47 times. Mojimon is the second exclusive and needed more than 4 calls, trained at least 16 times, overfed 6 times, and had 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Its path to Kawagamon, similar to Biomon's, would need at least 4 mistakes, training in the window of 8 to 15 times, being overfed 0 to 5 times, and have at least 5 sleep disturbances. Finally, Leomon was the last required with 0 to 3 calls and to train it more than 48 times. If a tamer couldn't meet any of these requirements, the Digimon would become the filth Digimon Nanemon. Like all the rest, an 80% win ratio of 15 battles was needed to get the ultimates, and this time around, the first one was Megadramon, digivolving from Monochromon, Leomon, and Sealamon. Piximon, mistranslated in Japanese as Picklemon, sometimes correctly called Piccolomon, was the tiny option, spawning from Cockatoriemon, Kawagamon, and Mojimon. And finally, Nanemon's only option forward was Digitamamon. By the way, Nanemon's name comes from the Japanese word meaning what, to denote an unknown, alien appearance that no one quite knows what it is. Funny, considering the appearance of some Digimon. What's that? You say Nanemon looks kind of familiar? Like, we've somehow seen it somewhere before? You'd actually be right. Nanemon is classified as a creature from another dimension with the title Oyaji, who originally lived as a digital pet. When it fell into the digital world, it had strengthened its body if it wanted to survive the digital world's harsh survival of the fittest environment. He's originally the Tamagotchi named Oyajichi, and is both Digimon's first use of the multiverse and strengthening Digimon's ties to its sister franchise. As we go on, we'll see multiple examples of how referential and self-referential Digimon is. On another note, the Tamagotchi Devilchi was released nearly a year after Digimon's V1 release containing Devimon, likely inspired by the digital monster's appearance. Unlike Oyajichi, there's no official lore connection with Devimon and Devilchi other than similar designs, but it would be very fascinating if somehow there was some cross-contamination of the franchises. V5 was released in August and has the unique distinction of being the only V-Pet where neither rookie forms were partners of the children of the TV franchise. Baby Zurumon and In-Training Pagumon would digivolve into either Gazamon with bad care or Gizamon with good care. Confusing, I know. Quick side note, Gazamon's name comes from the onomatopoeia gaze, the sound of eating. Gizamon, on the other hand, came from giza and means jagged. This time, Dark Tyrannomon takes the top spot as being the first exclusive option for Gazamon, with the standard 0 to 3 calls and training 48 times. Davidramon would need 0 to 3 calls and trained 0 to 47 times. Cyclomon would be the next exclusive, requiring 4 call mistakes, training 5 to 31 times, being overfed 3 times, and 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Tuskmon would need more than 4 calls, train more than 32 times, overfed 3 times, and have 0 to 6 sleep disturbances. Gizamon's first exclusive was Flymon, thankfully not an annoying pest, needing only 0 to 3 calls and training 0 to 47 times. Deltamon has such a strange sprite that I kept forgetting that the sprite was meant to be it, looking like a 3-headed dragon with no arms rather than being a creature with a head for hands. It was also a heavily needy Digimon, with 4 calls, 32 training sessions, being overfed more than 6 times, and needing 0 to 4 sleep disturbances. Gizamon's digivolution to Tuskmon and Dividramon would require 4 calls, train 8 to 15 times, being overfed 0 to 5 times, and have more than 5 sleep disturbances, and then having 0 to 3 calls and training 48 sessions, respectively. If none of the conditions were met, there would always be the filth option, Raremon, looking kind of like Cousin It lost his hat, or like some sort of swamp monster. Dark Tyrannomon, Dividramon, and Flymon would all digivolve to Metal Tyrannomon. Cyclomon, Tuskmon, and Deltamon would digivolve into this set's diminutive Digimon, Datamon, or Nanomon. And strangely, the only option for the rather nasty-looking Raremon was the surprisingly cute X-Tyrannomon. There are a lot of Tyrannomon-type Digimon. That's because Tyrannomon was the very first Digimon designed by Kenji Watanabe, in the same respect that Rhydon was the first Pokemon design. Also, a bit of trivia here. This whole line is likely paying homage to the Godzilla franchise, with Dark Tyrannomon being based off of Godzilla, Cyclomon off Gigan, Dividramon based off of Destoroyah, Tuskmon based off of Space Godzilla, Flymon based off Mothra, Deltamon, hey, my hunch was correct, based off of King Ghidorah, and Raremon based off of Hedorah. August also saw the release of a one-shot manga by the name of Come On Digimon alongside a pilot chapter of Naruto in the 3rd issue release of the sampler Akamatsu Shonen Jump. At the same time, it was unclear exactly what direction to take Digimon in. Nothing was set in stone, not even the final designs for many Digimon. The main character is Kentaro Kamon, and his design would partially inspire that of Taichi Yagami, or Taichi Kamiya as he is known in English. The story is set in the real world, where Digimon is another franchise like any other, although popular enough with children. There are lots of emphasis on the kids taking initiative with battles, interacting with others, and being competitive. In this world, everyone knows about Digimon and anyone can become a tamer. The manga starts with the battle using holographic display like what would be used in Yu-Gi-Oh! In 1998. The different concept Meramon fights a different concept Deathmon. Upon Meramon's defeat, the boy's V-Pet dock is smashed underfoot. The scene switches to school, where some boys are battling their Digimon. A boy named Makoto's Greymon wins, and he exposits about Digimon and the main character, who doesn't own a Digimon V-Pet. Trying to be friendly, Makoto approaches Kentaro about Digimon, but being a cold jerk, he brushes Makoto's attempts. A classmate remarks about how Kentaro is thought to hate pets, and the wrap on his arm is said to hide the scar from a dog bite. Makoto isn't allowed to own pets and feels strongly about his own Digimon as a surrogate. Not to be deterred, Makoto follows him after school, and the dock is somehow being sneaked into Kentaro's pocket. Giving in, Kentaro follows Makoto home and sees the 3D virtual monitor he claims his older brother made, and inserts Kentaro's dock into the slot. A peculiar Digimon manifests, a sort of halfway between Koromon and Agumon. It takes a liking to Kentaro and is thus nicknamed Bun for its wagging tail. The next day, Kentaro intends to give the dock back to Makoto, but the boy from before has come to challenge Makoto. By the time his friends enter the vehicle with the virtual coliseum, they see a display of Makoto's Greymon with a giant hole in its chest. The boy's name is Josaki Shinichiro. He is a spoiled rich kid who got it in his head to torture other kids by battling them with his likely illegally modified dock, and destroyed any that lose to his Digimon. Despite his best efforts, Makoto's dock is taken from him and destroyed. Enraged at seeing his friend's Digimon destroyed, Kentaro accepts Josaki's challenge. In 10 days they battle, so the boys work on training up the holographic Digimon who can manifest and exist in the real world once it realizes. Makoto uses his knowledge from raising his Greymon, but is worried that despite all of the progress, Bun doesn't digivolve. Kentaro gives up on training and instead treats Bun like a normal pet. His friends wonder if Bun was thrown away because he was broken and didn't digivolve. The day of the fight arrives and Josaki laughs, realizing that Bun is known as a Badmon, a defective Digimon that won't digivolve. The battle begins with Josaki demonstrating the shapeshifter abilities of his Deathmon, changing into a warped version of whatever enemies he's defeated previously. To mock them, Deathmon then changes to Death Metal Greymon, having used data from Makoto's Digimon. As Bun gets the crap beat out of him, Makoto then starts resenting Kentaro's laid-back attitude, dropping his training regimen. Deathmon changes again to Death Meramon, now specifically to mock and add insult to injury to Kentaro. Looking into his history, he reveals Kentaro's dog died in a fire caused by a cigarette butt. He further mocks him by calling the dog a dumb animal who only knew how to wag his tail. Not having any of it, Kentaro rips off his armband, showing the scar he got when his dog Bun dragged him out of the burning building, later succumbing to his burns and dying. It's heavily implied that Bun the Digimon is the reincarnation of the dog in some way, returning to his master to keep protecting him. Bun wags his tail so hard that he creates a cyclone vortex of air that blows the flames away, winning the battle. The story ends with Kentaro joining the other kids and playing with Digimon, though Bun can't seem to win any battles at all. As it's so early into the franchise, the story follows closely with the idea of raising the Digimon within the V-Pet, training them using particular methods, and generally being basic Tamagotchi game with breeding elements. Most kids who read the manga would have an understanding of what the kids were doing, having the same kind of mindset even if they can't see their Digimon in reality like in the manga. It's a cute little story that would eventually get a tankobon release as a little extra in front of the larger ongoing manga that would come out later. And by then, Digimon would change drastically from the simple atmosphere of a tamer and their Digimon in the real world. September 23, 1998 saw Digimon go to console with the Sega Saturn version of the V-Pet toys called Digital Monster Version S, Digimon Tamers. For the first time, the Digimon were in color, and no longer confined to the restrictions of the tiny V-Pet LCD screens, the sprites showing more detail than ever before. You could also raise up to 4 Digimon at the same time, and there were even rudimentary story plot elements featuring hackers. In this era of advancement, electronic networks connect to every country in the world. In this ocean of circuitry where a vast amount of information is gathered, at some point pseudo-lifeforms, seeming to have their own wills, arose. People today use these networks every day, and these accidental programs were accepted easily. These pseudo-lifeforms, called digital monsters, are widely generalized as electronic virtual pets, since they can grow and compete in virtual battles. They quickly become a boom. At the same time, network experts establish Digimon research organizations. Some of these organizations aim for education and peaceful uses, but other groups, made of hackers, will exploit Digimon for evil purposes, forming cliques that abuse Digimon and spread out. Among the general public, those who raise Digimon are acknowledged with the title of Tamers. These Digimon Tamers who raise Digimon receive enthusiastic praise, and a tamer who wins the virtual Digimon battle are the envy of everyone. Eventually getting the title of top tamer for training every Digimon and winning virtual battles became the dream of every Digimon tamer. Essentially, Digimon has its start with AI that has been found on the internet and have been discovered, and they are sentient of sorts. They became a thing of fascination and attraction and became extremely popular. The game starts with your computer being infected by a virus. Then soon, an email comes. Hi, I'm from Digital Monster Laboratory. Due to a mistake, I sent a Digimon to you. That Digimon will grow, but do not worry since it is a safe program tested here. So please raise it with care. For more information on how to raise it, please click on the icon to the right. This game introduces us fully to the concept of the digital world that we've only gotten a hint at through the background images our Digimon moved in front of, a place called File Island. In the game, you go around the island and collect medals from all over. Being defeated by a hacker will make you lose a medal. Winning a medal required 5 consecutive wins in a given area. At any time, a hacker could attack you randomly from the main screen or after certain story events. If you lost to a hacker, they take your newly acquired medal away. Digimon gained stats in this game that you could train up, including strength, speed, intelligence, and personality. There was a shop that you could buy food and supplies from. I really like this idea of the shop being sort of like an early form of online shopping, which actually started up a decade ago in 1985, surprisingly enough. You go into the shop website and purchase what you want. As everything is digital, it'll download conveniently into the folders on your computer. If you look on an online forum each day, there is a shop announcement that is updated at midnight telling you the discount hour where everything is on sale for 30% off. Or at least it was 30% off on my file. This can help immensely with very expensive items, though you'll still need a lot of money. The story would be sent through email, form exchanges, and newsletters. You'd become friends with other Tamers who gained your information through the Digimon network, and you'd exchange information on how to best raise your monsters, even hinted a bit of a romance between you and a girl that you exchange emails with. While the story's goal is to help Digimon protect Vile Island from hackers, the main objective is still to raise up your Digimon through their life, battle with them, and raise all sorts of new Digimon when their time is over. You gained money through these Coliseum battles or by playing a minigame on a website where you'd swap flies away from someone's sleeping Botamon. The entire game is set up as though you're on your desktop computer. From what I'm told, there's a function on the Saturn that allows for mouse function, adding to the feel that you're on your computer. Your Digimon essentially lived inside a pop-up screen on your desktop that you could maximize or minimize depending on what you wanted to focus on. The smaller screens held the original LCD sprites, while the focused on screen would have a much more detailed sprite, with custom animations, sounds, and a lot of personality. Each Digimon more or less had its own customized set of sprite animations for walking around, joy, anger, hunger, illness, and sleeping. It really feels like each of these creatures all have their own personalities apart from one another. The battles were mostly simplistic, with the main interactivity done being cheering your Digimon partner by mashing 3 buttons as fast as possible, basically showing them that you love and support them more than the other guy does their partner, while the Digimon themselves would fight on their own. The higher the stats, the faster that you could fill up the weight meter and the cheer meter to attack more often than the opponent. This is a must, as Digimon dodge so damn often in this game, it's frustratingly ridiculous. I've seen a Digimon dodge my Digimon's attacks 6 times in a row while getting 1 or 2 hits of its own in. Occasionally a Digimon can dodge and counterattack, and sometimes the attacks are critical hits. I'm not entirely sure if this is the case, but sometimes it feels as though the meters rise more slowly in certain areas or arenas depending on your Digimon. Or it slows down if you're meant to be up against an attribute or field disadvantage. It also might be a problem with the game itself or a glitch on the emulator I was using, but after a while mashing buttons didn't fill up my cheer meter despite how fast I pressed, but by that time my Digimon were fast enough with the weight meter to attack often anyways, so the arena battles lost all interactivity for me other than selecting what enemy to fight next. You could also gain different amounts of money depending on what enemies you battled. Rookies gave 500 Digidollars while champions gave 1500. Ultimates grant 2000 while the new Digimon gave 3000 per defeat. It can be quite lucrative with minimal amount of effort on the player's part to raise up a strong champion early on and then battle against ultimates in the area. Time only passes on the main screen, but you'll eventually be kicked out of the arena anyways by your Digimon needing something, usually food or medicine. There are 4 specialized arenas apart from the generic arena in the game: Sky, Water, Grass, and Cave, and these are prototypes for the fields that will come later. The final fight for each of these ordeals was a glimpse at a brand new Digimon introduced to this game: Gesomon for Water, Saber-Leomon for Grass, Roachmon or Gokemon for Cave, and Magnadramon for Sky. Each of them are available on different days and can be fought as many times as desired at any point after gaining the medals. There are 5 medals, however, and the final one can only be found on Fridays, and only at a specific hour between 5 to 6 p.m. There, you'll fight a nearly perfect status Megadramon, whereas all the previous enemies were capped slightly below their maximums for that level. Once you leave, you'll be attacked by the boss hacker, the main ringleader of all the misfortune in the game. It's a provocatively dressed woman with the brand new Digimon Lady Devimon as her partner. Once you defeat her, she'll take her minions and her influence from the island and will leave. There's a blogger called Backlog Game Reviews who did a very short review piece on it despite having around 30 hour-long silent videos documenting his playthrough of the game. He claims that Digimon don't have a stat cap increase when digivolving in this game, thus rendering digivolving more or less useless other than for aesthetic purposes, but that's simply not true. The stat caps for fresh and in training are at 32, while it's increased to 64 for rookies. Champions get 2 of their stats increased to 96, while ultimates raise the final 2 stats also to 96. These stat caps can be broken by feeding your Digimon software that is sold for a staggering 12,000 Digidollars. I have no idea what the money is called in this game other than the symbol is D. Buying them on the daily discount hours will reduce that to about 6,800 Digidollars. They'll allow your Digimon stats to increase to the maximum 128. While I haven't tested, you may be able to feed them 2 sets of these software updates as rookies if you want to raise your rookie to max stats. But as it'll digivolve in a couple of days anyways, there's not much point and is just a waste of money. You can also upgrade your gym, giving up to 5 upgrades for each of the training regimens except for the final one, which is just a small stat all-rounder. Your Digimon will perform training animations, and the success or failure, I'm told, is RNG. However, through multiple in-game weeks and several generations of Digimon, I noticed the success is fairly high when my Digimon was fresh-faced from asleep. And the more tired it was, the more times I failed the training, to the point where training 8 times in a row all resulted in 3 X's. The more blue circles you accumulate, the more points you gain, with 0 to 1 circles giving the amount of points that was the level of training. 2 giving you a little over half of the points, and 3 circles giving you that level's max points. For 2 successes, each level will give you the max points of the previous level. So if level 3 gives you 16 points for perfect training, that'll be the 2/3 option for level 4. That'll give you the 2 out of 3 option for level 4, with perfect training being 24. Evolution was the same as the original 4 V-Pets, though Digimon fragments could force a Digimon to digivolve into one another, despite all of your care mistakes, or otherwise not meeting requirements. But your Digimon is also not guaranteed to digivolve to Ultimate. There's a certain percentage chance of Digivolution failing, ending your Digimon's life despite meeting the requirements. This chance increases the higher the percentage of battles that you've won, but I believe that even then, it's a max cap of 80%, leaving a 20% chance of failure. Then all you can do is try to raise your Digimon differently to gain different Digimon, but always try to leave yourself a healthy pool of Digidollars when your Digimon is nearing the end of its life. 9 to 10 days for champions, and 13 to 15 days for ultimates, so the next generation can easily gain high stats for battling in the arena as well. All the Digimon from versions 1 to 4 were present in the game, including 14 Digimon new to the franchise for a total of 70 Digimon. The new Digimon included Anjewomon, Abidramon, Evilmon, Gatomon, or Tailmon, Gesomon, Gorillamon, Magnadramon, Lady Devimon, Mammothmon, or Mammon, Mechanorimon, Minotaurumon, Roachmon, and Saberleomon. And strangely enough, Shakomon. It seems that when Shakomon was originally conceived, it was meant to be an ultimate level Digimon, but directly after this game it was downgraded into a rookie. And as far as I'm aware, it's the only Digimon to get a level downgrade instead of a level upgrade. These new Digimon could only be obtained by a beta version of what would eventually be known as jogressing, taking any 2 Digimon above the rookie level and combining the 2 to create a brand new champion level Digimon. There's some quality of life additions to this game, like a cleaning robot, although I've never used it because that takes away the purpose of the game. But as the game almost requires you to have your screen filled up with your Digimon and to have to manage the needs of all 4 of them, it can get a little hectic. Especially since somehow I must have pressed a button or something, and either the game or the emulator itself fast-forwarded several times through my playthrough, and let me tell you, trying to manage 4 Digimon on ×2 speed when the game already passes at an in-game hour every minute is nearly impossible. While Backlog Gaming had issues with money, I found myself raking in the dough fairly easily in the arena just by raising the stats of 1 Digimon to max, or beyond max with the software update, and just letting my Digimon do its thing. Possibly with 4 Digimon like this, you can easily make a few dozen grand before needing to go back and give them food or medicine. Though you should watch out for the money hacker, who appears when you gain 20,000 Digidollars, and returns and gets stronger with every 20k earned. There are other hackers in this game besides the Kamen Rider-inspired Mook, who will only appear when certain requirements are met. If you digivolve an evil Digimon like Devimon, the Justice Hacker will attack you. Or if you gain a Metal Digimon like Metal Greymon, the Mad Scientist Hacker will battle you. There is also a Pirate Hacker who appears when getting a water or ice-themed Digimon, and a DJ Hacker that may attack you while your Digimon are sleeping, but I personally never came across this one. Considering the limited times the arenas were open, there had to be some planning to make sure that your Digimon were strong enough to fight. With the final fight, I raised up a Palmon that became Sealamon, but only after Friday had passed. Unfortunately, Sealamon died instead of digivolving the day before Friday came around again, so I had to attempt again with a more ill-prepared Digimon instead. There were 2 endings to the game, one where you get medals and another where you collect information that you raised every single Digimon in the game, including the special new ones. The story isn't very deep, and the mechanics are simplistic, but still enjoyable. But as Digimon's first foray out of V-Pets, this was huge, and the game was received fairly well at the time. It was also one of the few 2D games that came out on the Sega Saturn around this time, if the magazines are anything to go off of. I'm not including visual novels and pseudo-hentai games. But of course, as it came out in September, it was only a few months before the Saturn in America was discontinued, the final game release for it being Magic Knight Rayearth, so there was no possible way for it to make it overseas. The Saturn would be discontinued only 2 years later in Japan. But, finishing off the story in the game, with all the medals obtained, the hackers are driven off the island and the digital world is finally safe for everyone once again. Or is it? The first series of Digimon V-Pets were finished, and 2 months later in October, the Pendulum series was released, adding a large amount of new content and lore to the game. This series of V-Pets expanded the universe of the digital world, adding the continent of Folder to the previously established File Island, claiming the Digimon on Folder were stronger. Each release featured a different category, forever linking Digimon to different groupings. This series added an extra form to Digimon past Ultimate that was eventually called Mega. In Japan, this form beyond Perfect would be known as Ultimate, and this confusion is why I more or less decided to stick to one set of terminology between the English and Japanese. The Pendulums also added the third option of the in-training Digimon could become, for one of each category of Digimon, Data, Virus, or Vaccine. It also introduced us to the concept known as Jogress. I said an unfamiliar word, didn't I? What is Jogress, and why did I mention it earlier when I talked about it being an exception to the English-Japanese terminology rule? Jogress, as V-Tamer will later explain, is what the Japanese call DNA Digivolution, which will become a feature in the second season of Digimon. It is yet another portmanteau of English words, joint and progress. Digimon joining together to progress to a higher Digivolution. The Pendulum 1.0's category, labeled as New Species, was Nature Spirits. This new series would also mostly do away with the chance-based battles in favor of actual strategy. The first major talks with Toei and Shueisha were underway to branch Digimon into a multimedia franchise. According to Kensuke Ota, the project leader, the Pendulums were named after a professional wrestling move called the Pendulum Backbreaker. While he was disappointed with the meaning of the word in English, he thought it sounded cool all the same, and the name stuck with him until this new game. Despite fears that the game wouldn't sell well due to the difficulty of the name, Ota felt kids would find it appealing due to the difficulty, finding it appealing as he did as a child. The original series was designed to model a cage. The Pendulums were instead designed to look like a new high-tech device. The graphical limitations of the devices were also increased, leading to some minor sprite changes to some of the Digimon, including updated Agumon, Gabumon Greymon, and Metal Greymon. V-Jump also sold guides around the time of each set's releases, complete with full-color guides and text descriptions that would eventually be reused as a part of the Digimon reference book come 2007. Though unfortunately, the Pendulums and pretty much anything not directly tied to the anime never came over to the West. For those aware of it prior, saw it as a Tamagotchi knockoff instead of a brother series, and when the anime came out, it was seen as a Pokemon ripoff by those who only saw posters and promotional material. Superficial or overt similarities didn't matter, and any hope of these original aspects of Digimon gaining a foothold in the West was killed. The anime gained a large following due to the quality of the writing and being something unique on its own, but that never translated to any toy not based in the anime. The Pendulums would prove to be extremely popular, but unfortunately by the time they came out, Bandai USA had given up on Digimon V-Pets, and after the 5th version came out, stopped bringing them over, so these devices are completely unknown to Digimon fans, except for the most dedicated ones. I can't say for sure what the cause is, but I suspect it's partially the hype for Tamagotchi starting to fade away, but I suspect also it had a lot to do with Bandai itself. The American versions of the digital monster didn't come with the option to battle in D1 tournaments. I sometimes imagine where Digimon would be if allowed to be marketed like in Japan, setting up tournaments in local stores or festival areas and giving children this more in-depth experience, collecting stamps, getting their tamer tags, and trying out for the top tamer spot. It's hard to pinpoint when exactly it came out as there's no specific month I could find, but Bandai Asia began to promote the Digimon V-Pet toys in Asia's anime-esque magazine dedicated to manga and Chinese manhwa. Considering that there was a page that talked about the 1.5, I can assume it likely came out around this time in October of 1998 and December 1998. Yu Yuan Wong drew a Chinese Digimon manga called Battle Digital Monsters, with the first part consisting of 6 volumes called Digimon Thunderbolt Tournament. It's weird to say the least, especially as someone who doesn't know a thing about reading Chinese. The art style has an odd Osamu Tezuka feel to it. The main characters are three young children named Ma Zherong, Xingjing, and Sheng Zai, who has an odd lizard pet that might speak or emote. The kids are just normal children who I suppose just happen to have V-Pets in their pockets or backpacks, as we see the little kid check his while the other two argue about something. When they enter a shop with a weird old man, who I guess tells them about a tournament that gives the girl $ eyes, they decide to go to this thing at night and arrive at some sort of temple. The boys are jerks and try to scare the girl by wearing dinosaur masks and gloves, and she beats up Ma. They enter the building, which has a bunch of Buddha statues, which have glowing eyes and I guess do something to their V-Pets, spawning a bunch of Digimon out of them. They proceed to battle a series of opponents, flinging their V-Pets through the air, and through the power of magnets and cool, I guess, the V-Pets stick together and fall to the ground for a battle segment where the monsters holographically appear like Kaiba's dual frisbee prototypes for dual discs. The kids also might feel the blows that their monsters have, but I'm not sure, and it's just judging by what's drawn. Xingjing tries to battle the next opponent, but her Digimon is a Gazemon, which is a rookie facing a champion-level Raremon. For some reason, the noseless little kid thinks that his in-training Pagumon will help anything at all. The lead character is the only one with the champion level with Dark Tyrannomon and saves the day. Their third opponent is a woman with a bunny tail who is just chilling by a very tiny pond. Our Digimon bests Dark Tyrannomon in combat, which is saved by the newly digivolved Gizamon. Their next battle has all three of them battling a Deltamon, and a final battle with X-Tyrannomon. Yeah, these kids are screwed. Dark Tyrannomon gets completely liquefied except for his head, and the other two kids struggle with their rookies. Dark Tyrannomon digivolves into Metal Tyrannomon, and after a very long battle, X-Tyrannomon is blown to pieces. With the battles over, they suddenly end up outside in the daytime and they decide to go home. The last panel shows their shadows in the distance, with the foreground, a statue with the shadow of a Datamon on it. There is a special chapter that deals with the fight between the Datamon and the man that initially called them to this adventure, who turns out to be a robot. They defeat and trash him, but he survives, which leads to the second part, which lasted 25 chapters, called Battle Digital Monsters, Perfect Level Decisive Battle Chapter. The main character sports a new, spikier hairstyle, and the girl also has a new hairstyle, somewhat to go along with their new defined art style evolution the manhwa artist took between volumes. The kids continue to fight, which escalate to public property damage and a subway system, and their school with a hot new transfer student in possession of an Edamon, of course. It's the first time a Digimon gets personality in this manhwa outside of fighting, and it's kind of refreshing. And while I appreciate the over-the-top antics of Edamon in this manhwa, his personality is very clear and distinct and consistent throughout this franchise. There are a few choice panels I'd wish I'd never seen, and now I'm going to show you them, because if I have to see them, so do you. You're welcome. So of course, the only way that the kids can defeat Edamon is by being dirty cheaters, so they take the Monzaemon teddy bear Edamon has with him, that he coos at and seems itself to be somewhat sentient. It means a lot to him in Edamon lore. It gets destroyed and it drives Edamon into a rage. So to stop his rampage, our intelligent main characters run to a closet and get a giant teddy bear costume the school has laying around because reasons, and proceeds to distract Edamon enough for Middle Edamon to blast the ever-loving cotton out of Edamon until his head and arms blow off and he disappears. New Kid says something I have no idea and ninjas off into the night. Okay. So they continue battling more and more enemies, and eventually I guess their V-Pets decide to upgrade themselves, metamorphing into the new series of V-Pet dogs and breaking out of their shells like some sort of odd chicken-butterfly hybrids. The main character also gets a magical upgrade into a Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist with two-tone hair. I'm not making this up. So they win all the battles and I guess are friends with the new kid now, and the final panel shows a picture with all four of them with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist holding up a trophy. I also don't understand what the point of Xingjing is being around anymore. She kind of just stood there in the second round for 2 volumes. Did she just give up being a tamer? Did her Gazemon die? We see the little kid has two docks with the Seadramon and the Mamemon, so did she give her V-Pet to him because she's female and those creatures can't do things? Except getting kidnapped, which happened at least twice. As you do. I'll give credit to the manhwa as it keeps the closest to the original idea of the V-Pets along with Come On Digimon. It was also very nice to see the artist grow between volumes. There isn't much of a plot beyond the kids getting into a position to fight and showcasing the different Digimon in the V-Pets. So in many ways this manhwa is the most blatant advertisement for the toys. Then again, it's really hard to review something when you cannot read the language of it. So I did my best. 0.1 introduced Baby Papumon and In-Training Mochimon. The rookies were brand new Digimon, Vaccine-type Tentomon needing 0 to 1 care mistakes, Data-type Gatsumon requiring 2 to 4 care mistakes, and Virus-type Otamamon needing more than 5 care mistakes. Tentomon's exclusive was returning Digimon Kabuterimon requiring 0 to 2 care mistakes and training more than 40 times. Tentomon could also become the new Tortomon, if you kept the care mistakes between 0 to 2 but trained only 0 up to 39 times. He could also become another returning Digimon, Kawagamon, with more than 3 care mistakes and training more than 30 times. This time, there isn't really a filth option to the Pendulum, with Tentomon's final option being the new Digimon Geckomon. He requires more than 3 care mistakes and training only 0 to 19 times. Gatsumon also got an exclusive option with the returning Monochromon, requiring a maximum of 2 care mistakes and training more than 30 times. Gatsumon could also become Tortomon with 0 to 2 care mistakes and training 0 to 29 times. Starmon is a brand new Digimon that required more than 3 care mistakes and training more than 30 times. It could actually become one more Digimon with Geckomon, requiring more than 3 care mistakes and training 0 to 29 times. Otamamon unfortunately doesn't get an exclusive. Instead, it can become Tortomon with 0 to 2 care mistakes but training more than 40 times. It can become Starmon with 0 to 2 mistakes and training 0 to 39 times. Kawagamon with more than 3 care mistakes and training more than 20 times, and finally, Geckomon requires more than 3 care mistakes and training 0 to 19 times. The Pendulums in some way were a bit more lenient with digivolving to Ultimate, with new Digimon Vaccine Attribute Mega Kabuterimon, also known as Alter Kabuterimon, digivolving from Kabuterimon or Tortomon, requiring 2 or fewer calls, and a win ratio of 40% or higher, training more than 40 times and battling 30 times. Though 40% only gives you a 1 in 5 chance of succeeding, with 60% raising to 1 in 4 and 80% giving a 50-50 split. Alternatively, connecting to another tamer, you could jogress your champion or ultimate level Digimon to get different forms of ultimate level Digimon, or even the newly created Mega level. Jogressing 2 vaccine or data champions or ultimates resulted in brand new Digimon Jagamon. Though if it's your first or second generation is a factor in which Digimon can be jogressed at what level and with what Digimon. Another new Digimon, Triceramon, could digivolve from Monochromon or Starmon, requiring less than 4 calls with a win ratio of 40% or higher, training more than 40 times and battling 30 times. Alternatively, you could always jogress them into returning Digimon Piccolomon. The final 2 were also brand new to the series, with the regular Digivolution option being Okuamon. It digivolved from Kawagamon and Geckomon, with a stern requirement of 1 or fewer calls, battling 30 or more times and a win ratio of 40% or higher. The jogress option was a Digimon called Shogun Geckomon, or in Japanese it would be known as Tono-sama Geckomon. The Mega levels are a brand new rank in Digimon, and it starts off with some brand new Digimon and a previously seen Digimon that got a level promotion. Hercules Kabuterimon or Heracle Kabuterimon can digivolve normally from either Mega Kabuterimon or Okuamon, requiring absolutely perfect care and an over 60% win ratio. Saberleomon, making a return from its debut in version S, can be jogressed from Triceramon and a second generation Data Ultimate or Piccolomon and a first Data Ultimate. Metal Edamon jogresses from Okuamon and a second Virus Ultimate, or from Shogun Geckomon and a first Virus Ultimate. Trivia time! Shogun is the highest ranking noble in feudal Japan, while Tono-sama means feudal lord. So the names are fairly similar in origin. However, Tono-sama Gekomon is a pun on the black-spotted frog named Tomo-sama Geru in Japanese. Gecko Gecko is onomatopoeia for frog croaking. A lot of Digimon are named this way. Jaga or Jaga is Japanese for potato. O is another reading for large, and Kuagata is a stag beetle. Remember what I said with Metabots earlier? Stag beetles and rhinoceros beetles having a rivalry in Japanese culture? It's the same with Digimon too. Kabuterimon and Kuwagamon are eternal rivals, even after they digivolve. The 1.5 released January 1999 and replaced Tortamon with Gatomon, Jagamon with Anjouwomon, and Hercules Kabuterimon with Magnadramon. They required the exact same care and digivolution requirements. By the way, the Pendulums added a brand new mechanic into the game. If you took care of your Digimon completely and it had a full life, it could leave behind an egg. This is what's known as a traded egg, and when hatched, it will have an extra 10% chance of digivolving into Ultimate. The results can be accumulated, adding another 10% to the total with every generation. So it's now even more hammered home that digivolving to Ultimate is hard, and a rare occasion in and of itself, but let alone going all the way to Mega. A version 6 of the original series was released solely in Australia that was essentially a Pendulum 1.0 series, but it lacked the Mega category and the ability to Jagras. It added Shelnumamon to Otamamon's Digivolution line into Tekkamon with Kuwagamon and Starmon. Gekomon digivolved into Shogun Gekomon, Monochromon, Tortamon, and Kabuterimon all digivolved into Mega Kabuterimon Blue. This version is considered extremely rare and valuable due to it only being released in Australia. This new series was announced at the beginning of a brand new season of D-Run Grand Prix events, with the Pendulum being the flagship new series of the new tournament season. During the beginning of these events, children could battle Edamonkey's Edamon. As part of a promotion, Digimonkey digivolved into a new variation of this mascot called Super Digimonkey. When launched, the Pendulums ensured a shift away from the original set, as any Pendulum that battled the original V-Pet would register the Pendulum Digimon as Group L to signify their stronger status. This meant that instead of taking the time to raise the 5 original Group L, a tamer could invest in any Pendulum Digimon with less effort for the same results. A month later, on November 21st, a new manga called Digimon Adventure V-Tamer 01 was released. Unlike Come On Digimon, V-Tamer 01 is long, and is an actual dedicated series, with the rules of the franchise being better established than the tentatively speculative world of its V-Pet-focused one-shot predecessor. Created by Hiroshi Aizawa, the concepts of Digimon are a lot farther along than they were in Come On Digimon. It properly expands on the continent of Folder as a future entry will for File Island. It's also the start of Digimon's isekai elements, a feature that will be a mainstay for most of the franchise. And now it's time for Japanese lessons with Takara. Isekai is made up of the words koto and sekai. Combined together, koto changes from the Japanese kunyomi reading to the Chinese onyomi reading, I. It translates to different world and comprises of the genre of someone from our world somehow falling into an alternate, usually fantastical world apart from our own. Isekai is not a strange concept to the Monster Collection genre, with Monster Rancher's anime, Telefang, and eventually Pokemon spin-off series Mystery Dungeon being part of the genre. Isekai was the first foray Digimon took to create a unique identity for itself outside of its older sister Tamagotchi, focusing on Digimon fans being thrust into an alien world and discovering their beloved toy monsters are actually real. The main character is a young boy named Taichi Yagami, and his partner is the odd Digimon V-Dramon, nicknamed Zeromaru. Originally, Taichi was to be a 12-year-old boy named Kakeru Jimon, described as energetic and simplistic. Zero was originally unnamed, but was named Vivi by Jimon, and was a rookie instead of a champion, and had the mental capabilities of a 5-year-old child, and thus was highly dependent on Jimon. However, Toei wanted to use the same character across all aspects of the franchise, the manga, the movie, and the anime, so Taichi replaced him. Taichi was the new mascot of Digimon, the face and representative of the franchise, and still holds that incredible importance to this day. Agumon is often considered the mascot of Digimon, but he's primarily known as Taichi's Digimon, and thus representative of Taichi. Aizawa had a lot of creative freedom with Digimon designs when working on this manga, and took inspiration from the predecessor Digimon Bun when initially designing Zero. As Bun was meant to look dog-like as Kentaro's loyal pet reincarnated, Zero's initial design was meant to emulate that. His early designs are fairly dog-like, even adding a collar to his design at some point. Though his designs eventually became more dinosaur and lizard-like, the softer dog features were still kept in mind, which is why Zero keeps being referred to as a puppy dog. As Bun inspired Zero, Zero inspired the design of Vmon and X-Vmon, meant to be a more common subspecies of the original Vidramon that Zeromaru is. Though Zero didn't start out as a Vmon, but rather an Agumon. Why is it called V-Tamer 01? The name is a reference for the symbolism of the names. Rei being the Japanese rating for 0, Neo being an anagram of 1, the Ichi from Taichi's name being the Japanese word for 1, and 0 being self-explanatory, although Maru means circle in Japanese, turning Zero's name to 00, and together with Taichi, they make 100%. Taichi tries to participate in the D1 Grand Prix, being held in a local department store, but is barred from entry due to somehow having a Digimon that wasn't programmed into the game legally. By the way, that bratty kid looks kind of familiar, doesn't he? Upset at being disqualified, Taichi sits away from the festivities when a mysterious voice asks him to come to Holy Angel Castle. Suddenly, he is pulled from his seat into the digital world where he meets his flesh and blood Digimon partner, Zero. They quickly go about dominating File Island, with Taichi keeping a record book of all of his successes, somehow landing themselves on the continent of Folder, where they meet a Gabumon named Gabo. He's attacked by a Tortomon that Zero finds difficult to hurt with a punch. Gabo explains that this is because all of the enemies fought so far were the weaker File Island denizens compared to those on Folder. This doesn't deter Taichi or Zero in the slightest, and they quickly dispatch a Tortomon with Taichi's quick problem-solving skills and keen eye for weak spots. This comes into play again when they arrive at Holy Angel Castle, where they meet the near-abusive drill sergeant of a trainee army of Agumon, a Leomon named Leo. For those of you who are aware of Leomon in the wider Digimon canon, my immediate out-of-context answer to you is no. Leo doesn't believe that they need a human's help and battles Zero against his own specialized soldier Kawagabon, but are promptly defeated. For anyone who remembers the anime, you'll notice that Taichi is a bit different here than his anime counterpart. He's cockier, more of a strategist, confident in his own abilities and his bond with Zeromaru, and is fairly laid back. Nothing seems to bother him, and his lackadaisical attitude annoys many who view the situation as dire. He immediately took stock when reaching File Island for anything that he could use to his advantage, like edible foods and medicinal herbs. Lord Holy Angemon, or Magna Angemon as he's known in English, appears with Tonosama Gekkomon, or Shogun Gekkomon. His name is Gekkovich. Lord Holy Angemon explains to Taichi why he was brought here. A Digimon by the name of Daemon is causing havoc in their normally peaceful world. He is slowly raising an egg that is said to go beyond the Mega level. In Japanese, this level is called Super Ultimate, and in English it was dubbed Ultra. Quick side note, in the wider Digimon canon, the Super Ultimate / Ultra level isn't consistently considered across the board as being its own level, often said to be a stronger form of Ultimate or Mega compared to normal Digimon of the same level. Less than 20 Digimon to this day are considered to potentially be one of these incredibly rare next level or 8th level Digimon. The ranking isn't purely confined to V-Tamers, so it can't merely be considered a gimmick of the manga. Gekkovich is upset at Taichi's carefree attitude about the plight of the digital world, thinking that he overestimates his own power. Lord Holy Angemon watches in mild amusement as they battle, confident that Taichi and Zero will show the reason why he chose them to save the world from Daemon. Demi-Devimon was watching this and reports back to his boss, who in turn reports to a shadowed Daemon. The middleman Digimon wearing sunglasses and black biker vest claims that he is going to show Taichi their power. Gabo explains to an impatient Taichi that they can't merely storm Demon Castle where Daemon and the egg are hiding. They need 5 tags. Gabo explains that the castle was overtaken by Daemon and was once the home of the god of the digital world, who created it and hated human interference. So he sealed the castle so humans couldn't enter. God is never explained in more detail than this in V-Tamers, though it would be kind of elaborated more down the line, many years into the franchise. God is gone, but the seal remains, meaning for Taichi to breach the walls, he must gather the 5 V-Tamer tags. They are the tags of the Nature Spirits, Deep Savers, Metal Empire, Nightmare Soldiers, and Wind Guardians. Also, it should be noted that tags were kind of a big deal to Digimon very early in the Japanese part of the franchise. They're sort of like updated medals from version S, and all of this tamer and hacker activity could be the reason why many, including God, disliked humans. Though this is the first time that a human has physically entered the digital world instead of using their computers as a proxy. The relationship between humans and Digimon and the digital world is already being shown to being a complex one. On one hand, we now see that Digimon and the digital world is its own fully realized place with its own rules and laws. Humans may mostly see Digimon as cute pets, but Digimon see humans, particularly Tamers, in a different light. They share an equal partnership, with Tamer and Digimon partner trusting each other, and that trust gives the Digimon strength. But also there is something about the digital world that seems to manifest this bond in some sort of tangible way in the strength of the Digimon. A Tamer raises a strong Digimon, and that Tamer themselves acts as fuel for the Digimon's power. Also, while a Tamer may see their Digimon partner as a tool or disposable, the Digimon see their Tamer more delicately, a friend and a caregiver. They rely on their Tamer so much, but like with pets in the real world, it may be a toss-up whether their Tamer will reciprocate those feelings or abuse them for their classification as artificial. The group is attacked by an ultimate level Digimon who proves to be difficult to fight for Zero, though is eventually defeated and killed. We see Zero's body cracked and is breaking apart from damage, which I find is a very interesting concept. As Gabo chews out Zero for only being champion and worrying about him facing ultimate level Digimon, they're interrupted by an ape-like Digimon riding a monochromon. This Digimon's name is Edamonkey, who explains to them that they have to face the trial of an ultimate level Digimon guarding the tag. Zero fires an attack at Edamonkey, who is teasing them, and the attack bounces harmlessly off of him. His fun introduction to his new opponents done, he rides off again. Edamonkey, and Edamon as a whole, was inspired off the mascot of Digimonkey, continuing the tradition of taking members of the Digimon team and canonizing them as Digimon. Edamon is a puppet Digimon said to hold some strange creature inside, and well, Digimon is very meta. Let's just say it seems that whatever is inside Edamon's costume doesn't wear anything but the costume. His mannerisms and attitude, I imagine, are meant to reflect how Digimonkey was portrayed in these very early days before the mascot's eventual retirement in 2000. I also hear he's based off of enka singers being melodramatic. Off Taichi and his friends go around the continent of Folder in search of the different V-Tamer tags. Along the way, Taichi is gifted the Digivice 01 by an elderly Lord Waymon before he died to help Taichi send his thoughts and commands more quickly to Zero, or in situations where it's impossible, like underwater. We also see that despite having physical bodies and animal-like needs, their bodies are just data, ones and zeros, programs that can be corrupted by viruses and influence human technology. After all, Digimon got their start gaining sentience within cyberkinetic spaces of human networks without their knowledge. With each defeat for the V-Tamer tag, Edamon is there to cheer on their entertaining victory, though Daemon doesn't quite like this constant failure. We see 2 Digimon during this journey die, turning into Digi-Eggs, showing that the idea of death for Digimon isn't completely permanent, and their data is recycled to be reborn anew, just like in the VPEG games. This ends the first volume of the Tankobon volume, which, despite the initial chapter release, won't be released until the 3rd of December of 1999. I'll be following the Tankobon releases from now on, so it'll be a while before we revisit Taichi and Zeromaru again. Pendulum 2.0 was released in December of 1998 and was entirely water-themed with the Deep Savers. It introduced baby Pichimon and in-training Bukamon, as well as the vaccine attribute Gomamon for 0 to 1 mistakes, data-type Crabmon or Ganemon, and is obtained with 2 to 3 mistakes, and making a return since version S is virus attribute Shakomon, or Syakomon in English, taking from the Nihon Shiki romanization of Syako. Good thing too, because there will soon be another Digimon called Shakomon coming out roughly in a year or two. It sounds different to Japanese people, but not as much to us. This Digimon required a minimum of 4 care mistakes to obtain. Gomamon can digivolve into a Kakumon with 0 to 2 care mistakes and training more than 30 times. It can also digivolve into Dolphmon or Rukamon with 0 to 2 care calls and training 0 to 29 times. The third option is Octomon, requiring more than 3 calls and training 0 to 29 times. The new Digimon streak is finally broken with this last Digimon, Sealamon, requiring more than 3 calls and training more than 30 times. Crabmon's first option for Digivolution is Dolphmon with the same 0 to 2 mistakes but training more than 30 times. Cedarmon makes a return, requiring 0 to 2 mistakes and training 0 to 29 times. Sealamon could be obtained with more than 3 care mistakes and training 20 or more times. Finally, we end on another new Digimon, Gesomon, requiring more than 3 care calls and training a measly 0 to 19 times. Syakomon could digivolve into Ikakumon as long as you put in the work of 0 calls and training more than 35 times. Cedarmon also needed no mistakes, but only needed to be trained for 0 to 34 times. Gesomon allows 1 care mistake, but needs to be trained more than 30 times. And finally, Octomon also allowed 1 care mistake, but trained 0 to 29 times. Champions could digivolve normally or Jawgrass, and all of the Digimon are completely new. Zudomon can be digivolved normally by either Ikakumon or Rukamon, both needing 2 or fewer care mistakes and battling 30 times with a 40% win ratio at minimum. Or they could Jawgrass with a vaccine or data champion into Waymon. Hang on, I said that there were brand new Digimon for the last 2 levels. That is correct. This Waymon is different from the Waymon that we've previously met, which is a denizen that lived off of the coast of File Island. As we've already learned, those that exist on Folder are stronger, and the Waymon said to live in the deep net ocean around Folder is said to be bigger and much stronger than their File Island counterparts, even though that they look completely identical. They've evolved to be ultimate level rather than champion. For the data attribute ultimate, Mega Seadramon could be digivolved through normal means if one had Sealamon or Seadramon. 4 or fewer calls and 30 more battles with a 40% win ratio was required. Otherwise, they could Jawgrass into Animalikaramon with a vaccine, data, or virus champions or ultimates. Finally, the virus attribute ultimate option was Marine Devimon. It digivolved from Gesomon and Octomon and required 1 call or fewer and battled 30 times with a 40% win ratio. Or, with virus and data champions or virus ultimates, could become the H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu-inspired Dagomon, taking its name from the Philistine god Dagon. This Digimon would have an appearance in the rather infamous and controversial episode of the 2nd season of the anime, which I'll get into in that video. Marine Angemon could be digivolved normally if one maintained perfect care and won 60% of their battles for their Zudomon or Waymon. Metal Seadramon is the product of Jawgrass with the data ultimates. Lastly, Pukumon is also a Jawgrass Digimon and required Jawgrassing with virus ultimates. 2.5 came out in April of 1999 and would replace Sealamon with Ebimon, Animalikaramon with Hangyomon or Divermon or Divemon or Scubamon. Couldn't really decide what to call this thing in English, huh? In other languages, it's apparently called Amabiamon or Ambiamon, and finally, they replaced Metal Seadramon with Plesiomon. January 28, 1999 saw the release of Digimon's second console game and first to be released outside of Japan, Digimon World. Though the game wouldn't be released in America for another 1.5 years, and a further year after that to reach Europe. It would release on PC in Korea in 2002. The protagonist, Blacknet Catman, Hiro or Mameo, is a young boy who is into Digimon. We first see him as he runs into a park where his friends are playing with their V-Pets. He's excited to see Metal Greymon face up against Metal Mamemon, and an animation follows where the game digitizes into a landscape where the 2 ultimates are battling each other. Mameo goes home in the evening to a note where his mother is working late. There is an odd noise that draws him to the bedroom where a fully 3D Koromon is within his V-Pet screen, and soon Mameo is pulled into the device. By the way, I believe that this is Mona Marshall's first foray into Digimon, taking the speaking role of both the protagonist and one of his friends, while Mary Chang took the other friend. Already, this game is very different from the version S. We're no longer interacting with our Digimon from a computer screen. This time, we're physically entering the digital world and interacting with our Digimon like Taichi does in V-Tamers. While in version S we got a hint at the different personalities of the Digimon through their animations, we got to see it when we talked to them and see that they live their normal lives in their own world behind the computer screen. Digimon, a Digimon that hasn't been seen yet before this game, tells you that you've been summoned to the digital world because something is causing Digimon to lose their minds and the fate of the island may be at stake. They leave the Village of Beginnings, or Foul City as it's known in English, to live in the forest and are hostile, their memories of their more civilized, peaceful lives all but gone. Mameo's job is to battle the Digimon and knock their senses back into them and invite them back to live in the village, save the island, and figure out the mystery of what's causing everything to go wrong. He'll also appear at the very beginning of a new file to ask you questions. There aren't many, and they're mostly meant to decide whether or not the player gets an Agumon or a Gabumon to start with. The plot exists, as rudimentary as it is more complicated and dedicated as a video game than its predecessor, but the main focus of the game is still raising up your Digimon partner. There isn't a lot of control to the battle system of the game, which some might find frustrating if they're used to a game where you control every aspect of the battling characters. Your character hangs back while your Digimon fights, and depending on how much brain your Digimon has determines what calls that you can give them, ranging from letting them do whatever they wanted to some small level of strategy. When your Digimon has over 500 brain, you can order them to do specific attacks that you've learned while battling other Digimon throughout your journey. It's different from the Pokemon method of choosing which attacks that your Digimon will use, and giving it commands and controlling your monster's actions that way. It wasn't the point of the game so much as raising your Digimon up to be a fighter by purposefully selecting the traits to focus on, what attacks best suit your playstyle, or for battling in that moment. The games are meant to emphasize that Digimon are their own beings. They're wild, but you can befriend them. They're sentient creatures you are meant to have equal partnership with. As a tamer, you support your Digimon through battles, not control them. As the game goes on, you're less focused on ordering your Digimon to do things so much as constantly being vigilant of your monster's HP and MP, and of course, status conditions, throwing health items at them when something gets worryingly low. The stats you had to train up were your standard HP and MP, but you also had power, brain, speed, and defense, as well as happiness and discipline. The first 6 stats are very standard. Having a higher happiness stat increases the lifespan your Digimon will survive for. Discipline determines how well they perform in battle at your commands and whether or not they refuse items you try and give them, but at the cost of reducing the lifespan of your monster. I'll talk more about this later. Brain determines how frequently Digimon learn new attacks, whether through training or osmosis gained from battling Digimon on the field called techniques. Tamers need to be vigilant of the needs of the Digimon while going through the game, and well, that's the main purpose of the game, to take care of your Digimon, to raise your Digimon into different monsters. How well you raise your Digimon determines what it will digivolve into and the stats needed to make certain requirements, and of course the Digimon needs to be of a certain weight. You had to make sure that you fed it when hungry, medicated it when injured, made sure that it went to the bathroom at a toilet on top of training and battling. Feeding a Digimon food made it gain weight, but pooping made it lose weight. Too much weight loss or gain makes it difficult for some Digivolutions to be possible. It's also basically impossible for anyone to gain the final level, Ultimate, early in the game before a gym upgrade. Trying to do so is a waste of time and resources, as gaining the strongest Digimon also isn't the focus. At least not right away. Any training session will give you less than 10 points and take an in-game hour to complete, even if you fast-track it by pressing a button. Then factoring in bathroom and food breaks and your Digimon getting tired, it might be possible to get a couple of the stats where they need to be, but 100 points off everything else, by the time that your Digimon is elderly and about to fade away. Especially with how different the anime is compared to the game and literally every other game from Digimon media, if someone came into these games expecting forward momentum with their Digimon in the same way Pokemon does, they'll of course be disappointed. The game will give you opportunities to digivolve into Ultimate as the game progresses, but it won't be like that until at least midway through the game. There are also several different ways to digivolve your Digimon partner other than the standard meeting stat requirements. If your rookie level Digimon meets no requirement for other Digivolution, usually the weight requirement, it will digivolve into Numemon, in which the only option is dragging your weak slime creature to Toy Town to slip into a Monzaemon suit. However, no matter what level your Digimon is, if it poops on the ground too much, its virus meter will rise, and when full, your monster digivolves no matter what stage it currently is into the living poop creature Sukamon. The only option for Digivolution at that point is Edamon, unless if you take a trip to Trash Mountain to ask the Sukamon King to turn your Digimon back to what it originally was. There's also a basic form of what will eventually be called Slide Evolution in the anime's 4th season, with Digimon switching or digivolving between different forms of the same level. There's also something that will come to be known as Death Digivolution. This is also the first time that we see alternative subspecies of Digimon in the media. Actually, as far as I'm aware, this game introduces us to a whole host of new Digimon, more than has ever been released at one time. And that plays into the story, as Digimon explains that there's more to Digimon and more to the digital world than most humans are aware of. These monsters are entities who are considered to have evolved to fit their environment. In terms of gameplay, they're both used to differentiate between enemies you fight and Digimon that you recruit to live in the village, as they all have different appearances. Examples include the yellow Kunamon, an early recruit into the city, and the green Dokunemon, the pink-flowered Data-type Palmon, and the purple-flowered Virus-type Alraomon, the Data and Fire-themed Gabumon contrasting with the vaccine flashy, electric-themed Psychomon. Patamon is a Data-type, while the purple Tsukaimon is a Virus. Frigimon is an ice-based Digimon, while Mud Frigimon, sometimes known as Chuchidarumon, is earth-based. Mojimon is an ice-themed vaccine, while Jungle Mojimon is earth-based. Data-type Dermojimon and vaccine-type Nice Dermojimon, sporting a mustache, and Nijimon, Vaccine, and Kogamon Data, who mostly differ in their colors, red and purple respectively, and what shape their shuriken are. Not all variants are merely recolors though. Shima Unimon is a zebra-like variant of Unimon who has wings instead of stripes, on top of the former being a Data and the latter being a vaccine. Pidomon is a more fire-based variation of Angemon, with the blue cloth being replaced by a pink one, and its holy rod having crescent moon shapes at the end. Gururumon is a nearly white variant of Garurumon and has a slightly darker theme to its attacks and habitat. There are many more variations that appear in this game, and they serve the purpose of filling out the world, differentiating enemies from story progression bosses, and in-universe builds an understanding that Digimon are very evolution-oriented along with its survival of the fittest mantra. Some Digimon that are more closely related will look more similar to each other, while subspecies that aren't as closely related will still fall under the naming convention but look very different, or have branched out so far from their closest living relatives that despite being subspecies holds barely any physical characteristics in common, and their names are very different. Evolution into these new species and subspecies is different from the concept of digivolution, a metamorphosis-like progression into a stronger, different-looking creature. Essentially like butterflies having evolved and diversified into different species, but still metamorphing from caterpillars when reaching adult life. The gameplay itself is a puzzle sandbox with potentially the whole island being open to you as long as you can make it to your destination. There are sections closed off first, but they open up to you when solving certain things or situations. You start off in the Village of Beginnings, Fowl City, and can immediately explore the Unwavering Forest, called Native Forest in English. It contains other locations such as Dragon Eye Lake, Beetle Land, Sela Point, Mount Panorama, or as it's known in Japanese, Miharashi Mountain. Other locations around File Island include Gear Savannah, which is home to Factorial Town, and Trash Mountain. They follow into Gecko Swamp, Misty Trees, where Toy Town is located, and Freeze Land, with Ice Cape, Ice Sanctuary, and Kamakura Village. On the other side is Tropical Jungle, home to the Overdell Cemetery, which contains Grey Lord Mansion. Next to it is Great Canyon, which connects to Freezeland. Beyond the jungle is the Mangrove region, Naked Beach, and Amida Forest, which leads into the Ancient Dino region, split into the Ancient Glacio region and Ancient Speedy region. And finally, at the center of the island, Infinity Mountain. Digimon World mostly allows you to have free reign where you adventure to, though I recommend always going back to Digimon's house and picking up your starter pack from Tokomon, then visiting Tanemon at the farm to grab some meat to feed your Digimon. Oh yes, I almost forgot. Digimon grow meat on farms, the flesh and bones literally popping out of the ground like steak-flavored flowers. The whole island is a mix of natural and unnatural elements blended together to show that the digital world and Digimon themselves are simultaneously both real and not real, natural and unnatural, familiar and yet bizarre. The digital world is like our world, but jarringly alien as well. Mameo goes through File Island, meeting the inhabitants and convincing some of them to come to the city. Each edition adds to the city, giving it a different appearance as well as benefiting the player with upgrades. The first and most important recruit is Agumon, which upon defeat will take up residence in the rundown building next to Gigimon's house. He's also one of the few unskippable recruits, unless if you try really, really hard. He is the item keeper, and will store any excess items that you have. Almost immediately you can come across Kunemon, who will open a shortcut from the village to Digimon Bridge, which is broken until you cross the water hopping on Selamon's back, later able to recruit him as an item shop owner, though you can only find him and talk to him in the evenings. Palmon is near the bottom of Native Forest and gives a very quick upgrade to Tanemon's meat farm. A small upgrade to the shop can be obtained early when crossing the bridge by the way of Betamon, who is much darker and richer in color than the Madoki Betamon that we've been fighting so far. An important, though missable recruit is Centaurumon, who makes Mameo go through a test, having heard of his mission to recruit Digimon to the city. He wants to help, but he also wants to make sure Mameo's up to the task by lying many items on the ground as bait and shooting at him. This is also a great way to farm for items really early in the game, as long as you have enough recovery items or keep going back over successive days. Centaurumon will open up a medical clinic where you can go and heal your partner if he becomes injured, sick, or tired. Recruiting Centaurumon opens up the path to the ancient Dino region, which is guarded by Tyrannomon. He'll tell you everyone's on alert now that the Digimon are acting weird, and on top of that, the top half of the island suddenly appeared within the last 100 or so years. This is also around the time that we learned that time doesn't pass normally in the digital world like it does in our world. Years only last a month, and the days pass by so quickly while Mameo isn't affected. His body is still in the real world's time, which is why he doesn't feel hungry or tired. Tyrannomon helps give a clue to the strange happenings of the island, as well as something that landed in the Speedy region recently, but warns to be careful as time goes by faster in that area, where it goes slower than normal in the glacial region. The glacial region is a great place to grind without your Digimon dying as quickly due to half a normal day passing at the same amount of time that it would take the rest of the island. One should only go into the Speedy region with a fresh Digimon, or one that is very young, or else risking your Digimon dying or fading away in the middle of your search. But upon finding the meteorite Tyrannomon mentions, it turns out that it's a bit of a dead end, with it being the Digimon that is born in space and falls down to the digital world. Upon returning to Tyrannomon, you assure him that what made everyone nervous is just a natural phenomenon, and this unlocks him coming to the city with a guest appearance by a brand new Digimon, Master Tyrannomon. Tyrannomon will unlock a restaurant where you can easily get food that will both make your Digimon get full and give a slight stat boost with every meal. On the other side of the island near the native forest is Drill Tunnel. There, Dromojimon are digging under the ground to open up the island, but they're plagued by an intense heat. Here, you can help them by moving dirt for a big early boost in money and stats each time that you return the empty cart. But Tamers must always be vigilant of needing the bathroom while on these jobs, as you can't leave the tunnel while working, meaning that you can have accidents. Higher discipline allows for longer allowances to run to the bathroom, a little over a minute, but it decreases in time the lower your discipline is, and you may not have access to the lifesaver known as a porta potty yet. Leaving and coming back will show that Dromojimon got stuck due to a big rock. It can only be moved by a champion level Digimon or higher, and once it's moved, you can now explore deeper into the tunnels, where it's revealed magma is flowing everywhere. Meramon realized the island is in danger and plans on alerting everyone of this by putting the island in more danger? Upon defeat, he realizes that there's another way, and comes to the city with an upgrade to the restaurant. With Meramon gone, the magma is too, giving a pathway deeper into the tunnels. There's two different paths, but it'll be a while before the tunnel is opened. Luckily, Meramon's antics caused a rock slide, and a pathway is now open to access Mount Panorama. Going through, depending on which path you take, you can find strange mechanical circles on the ground, which will become important later. At the foot of the mountain, there are mud Frigimon running around, and occasionally you can find them absent, and instead a diminutive Digimon called Mamemon is standing there gunning for a fight. I wouldn't recommend going after him unless if you're really strong, but he's an RNG appearance, so it'll take multiple attempts at leaving and entering the screen to find him again. Beyond the mountain is Gear Savannah, where a bunch of new recruits are immediately available. The first is Elekmon, who will zap you a few times before talking to you, then Patamon, who will fight you 3 times before joining the city, then Biomon, who mistakes you for a kidnapper. Near Factorial Town is a secret shop with these odd-robed figures that don't seem to be quite Digimon, though they're using Digimon's model. They'll sell you some rare items, as well as trading cards, which will become very important soon. You can also occasionally find some of your things being sold there if they got stolen upon being defeated. Speaking of which, your Digimon only has 3 lives, so if your Digimon is defeated in battle, it will automatically fade away, and you'll lose some items, as well as some of your hard-earned techniques. Your Digimon will automatically fade away after a while no matter what you do, as that's just a part of the natural cycle of life in the digital world. Or rather, it should be. It seems your partner is the only one who can digivolve, let alone live out the natural process, probably due to your influence. It seems Digivolution and the natural dying-reviving cycle has been halted, as well as other things that have been happening, with Digimon even forgetting that they have the ability to digivolve. Otherwise, your Digimon has a set lifespan and will eventually die or fade away. Their outer skin will slough off in pieces until their meshes are exposed. That too will melt together until all that's left is the Digicore, shining momentarily before it too descends into the broken mess of data that was once your partner. When your Digimon dies naturally, you have the ability to choose what kind of egg it will become, and you'll potentially gain a brand new Digimon to follow you around. This is the only way to complete the Digivolution chart, though there are some unconventional methods to some of them. Going down an alternate path will allow you to encounter the noble Leomon, who fends off attackers from Patamon. But he won't join the city, as he's looking for something that his ancestors gave him. But he stays near a small gym that you train at. Trash Mountain is an important destination, as it has the best MP gym in the game, and access to the old fishing rod and King Sukumon. King Sukumon is special as he gives you relief if you're so bad at caring for your Digimon's toilet needs your virus meter fills up and it turns into the poop monster Sukumon, which is the only way to get this Digimon in the game. He'll de-transform your Digimon back into whatever form it took before the virus meter filled, so don't worry if you got a Digimon you wanted only for you to lose it. But if you want Edamon, you can always get Sukumon on purpose. With the old fishing rod, you can go fishing at Dragon Eye Lake and get the Digi-anchovies, which are a good source of food and are important for a money trick in the game. Though this money trick does take a long time to do, as it involves going to a merchant Mojimon in Friesland, only to trade 1 item at a time. But if you can stand the long lengths of time to do the trick, it involves getting as many fish as possible for a total of 99 using bait, usually mushrooms or small meat, to gain the Digi-anchovies, then running over to Friesland to trade them for super speed discs. You can either sell these for 2,000 bits each, thankfully able to bulk sell them. Alternatively, if you already have a lot of money, you can buy medium recoveries for 500 bits each, getting a discount if you have a baby Digimon with you, and sell them to the same Mojimon for super defense discs. Selling those will give you a lot of money, the profit greater or slightly lesser depending on how much money that you spent to get your final bit total. Friesland will also have the giant Digimon Waymon, who will eventually ask for your help after you dealt with Ogremon the first time. A skippable area is Greylord Mansion, a place where virus and spooky-themed Digimon reside. An immediate recruit is Bakemon. Although you can't understand him, you have to guess what he wants to know. A yes-yes-no option will bring him to the city. The only way inside the mansion is to bring along a virus attribute Digimon. Most of the doors inside the mansion are locked until you find the key, going past Soulmon with their little hats, and finally to a laboratory where you fall through to a previously locked room that you find a secret area where Myotismon has collapsed from lack of food. All his underdogs usually provide this workaholic with meals, and as they've lost their minds, he forgot to eat. Getting steak for him will bring him back to life, and he'll explain the situation. He still has research to do, so he can't go to the city yet, as much as he actually does want to help out. Going across an invisible bridge will get you to Great Canyon, and there you'll be ambushed by Ogremon and his funky Agumon. You defeat them and he'll run away. You can get to his hideout by first falling down a cliff, then unsticking a rock from an elevator at the bottom, allowing you to go up and down. Continuing on at the bottom will take you to Ogremon's hideout, but using the elevator to go to the top will take you to Bergermon's nest, where you'll fight her before she joins as a transport vehicle. Now you can quick travel to several locations across the island for a small sum of money, including Beetleland. Kicking Ogremon out of his hideout will unlock Shellmon, who gives tips on unlocking certain things. The game doesn't handhold you, so if you get stuck at any point, talking to friendly Digimon or exploring for yourself is the main way of progressing through the game. Shellmon will be integral to unlocking other events, such as getting Myodismon and his creation Skullgreymon to the city, when she mocks him for being an old man that might retire from fighting due to his old age. Rude. She'll also help with things like guiding you to Seadramon if you haven't discovered him already, as just like Sealamon, he only comes out during the early mornings and evenings. You'll need to get past Gear Savannah to Gecko Swamp to find and fight the bratty Otamamon in order to unlock another important Digimon, Shogun Geckomon. He'll tell you about misty trees and how to get past the fog to look for Cherrymon. If you manage to somehow already find Cherrymon before meeting Shogun Geckomon, alternative dialogue will lead to him giving you a Digi-Sea-Bass, which when eaten can increase the lifespan of your Digimon by quite a bit. It's much harder to do as it'll treat everything much more like a maze than if you talk to him first. He won't go to the city, but he'll trade cards with you in exchange for his own form of currency, which you'll spend for very rare items, some of them being chips that give a big boost to stats, some Digivolution items to digivolve your mons to specific Digimon regardless of limitations or requirements, and an amazing rod. This rod is important as it'll give access to harder fish to catch, including the Lake Guardian, Seadramon. Seadramon gives a variety of benefits, including unlocking Beetleland, giving a Seadramon Digivolution item, and allowing you to effortlessly learn any kind of ice technique, as long as you can capture Seadramon again. He's extremely difficult to catch, even with the upgraded rod, and requires a lot of patience and a bit of luck. But if you can get through all of those things first, catch him one last time, and ask to befriend him, he'll give you a blue flute to use at any time to summon him, as well as unlocking Beetleland. This island is home to incredibly strong insect Digimon, where a special tournament is held where only bugs can compete. The winner gets to digivolve into Hercules Kabuterimon, and it's the only method to get this Digimon in the game. If we go through the misty trees and find Cherrymon, you'll notice that he has quite the unusual appearance in this game compared to every other subsequent appearance of the Digimon. Seems like this is his beta appearance, as he'll never look quite this young and sparse ever again. But Cherrymon will clear the fog, which was meant to lure you in, as he can tell you what he knows of the island. 8 years ago, the northern half of the island suddenly appeared, and suddenly Digimon all over began to forget who they were. They started speaking their own languages, different from the Digimon language Mameo can suddenly understand after he arrived. He opened the way deeper into the forest where Toy Town resides. Unfortunately, you can't really do anything here unless if you take bad care of your Digimon to get a Numamon. When you get one, you'll be able to slip him inside the Monzaemon suit and he'll digivolve. Then you'll talk to the first set of Digimon that don't exist outside of this game or its sequel, Digimon World 2. Tinmon are toys that live in the other building opposite of the costume building and tell you that they're in an emergency. An evil Digimon has kidnapped a friend and hidden away inside the main building. They believe only Monzaemon can solve their problem. There are several waves of enemies inside the Lego mansion before they finally meet the new Digimon, an evil incarnation of Monzaemon called Waru Monzaemon. When I was a kid, I thought this name was meant to be like War Monzaemon, but now I know Waru is the Japanese word for bad or evil. Pretty self-explanatory. Tinmon's Japanese name is Blickmon, which is Dutch for tin plate. Defeating him will relinquish a gear, actually a Digimon called Hagurumon. The Tinmon will then tell you people with ill intent came with intent on taking over File Island and subjugating the island and its denizens. The Digimon united and drove off the invaders, though they promised they'd be back. Monzaemon joins the city as a stuffed animal, and you can search around misty trees for Gabumon and Kakatorimon. Friesland has a Garurumon standing at the start of the entrance from misty trees, and he'll require 2 battles to bring to the city. One where after he's defeated, he demands a rematch tomorrow at 4 p.m. It's a 24-hour clock instead of a 12-hour one, and knowing that can make the difference between Garurumon fighting at half strength or not, as his wounds will heal if you fight him a different day. He'll request the rematch, where Mameo isn't involved, so no healing items or boost discs or anything but your own partner's strength. You'll have to make sure that your Digimon is strong enough to withstand on their own. He'll upgrade the restaurant with more meals. Frigimon will also upgrade the restaurant, but you can only get her by taking a Digimon that has no resistance to the cold and run around with your sick Digimon until they pass out. Frigimon will save you and your partner and scold you for bringing a Digimon like that into the cold climate. Mameo promises not to come back until his partner digivolves, which confuses her. When you return with a digivolved monster, she'll join the city. There's also Penguinmon, who offers a curling minigame in the city if you can defeat him. And the last Mojimon you sell something to will also join the city, so make sure that it's one that you don't want to keep around. Waymon will also be there to take you to his cave, where Ogremon has set up shop and makes you battle another new Digimon to the franchise, Waru Seedramon. He'll fake you out and escape, but giving you access to Waymon, who is another transport Digimon, who will instead take you to Factorial Town. It's a metal city where Andromon works, and home to Numamon in the sewers. However, Numamon is poisoned, and Andromon is oblivious and dismissive. To help the slug out, you need to sneak past the Gardramon and see the guardian of the city, Giromon, who has been brainwashed into destroying the computers. Defeating him, checking on Numamon, who will open up a secret shop in Foul City, and going back to Andromon will reveal that the evil people Tinmon mentioned were humans, or what Digimon call analog humans, who came to the island around 100 years ago and fought a war with Digimon for the island. But the data on the history was damaged, and that's all that could be recovered. Now knowing that he's here to right the wrongs of his own people, Mameo is extra determined to call everyone to the city. Andromon and Giromon will also come to the city, as well as Metal Mamemon, if you can find him. Just like Mamemon, he appears randomly with RNG on a specific screen. Thankfully, there's only one other Digimon that does this, the Digimon Piximon at Naked Beach, who is incredibly strong. Another skippable area is Ice Sanctuary, located in Friesland. Just like the Grey Lord Mansion, it's impossible to go inside without a vaccine Digimon. There, you'll unfreeze Angemon, who will be recruited to the city. He has the ability to tell you what Digimon are left out there that are recruitable. In the same sense, Ninjamon is an encounter that, when defeated, will tell you in greater detail all about the different obtainable items. Ogremon can be fought one last time, having taken over Drill Tunnel. Upon his defeat there, he'll give up, but upon prodding from Mameo, who will forgive him and assures everyone else will too if he apologizes, goes to the city. Dromojimon is done with digging, so if not recruited already, can be. An ancient lair where a stone tablet resides is also uncovered. It's the tablet from Leomon's ancestors that he's been looking for, and once you give it to him, he goes to the city. Going back to Grey Lord Mansion will reveal Myotismon has been kidnapped by Devinmon, a Digimon that has been brainwashed. Fighting Tekkenmon, a sort of bad version of Giromon, will give you access to Myotismon and his creation Skullgreymon. After defeating it, the jail cell Myotismon's been stuffed into will open, and both he and his creation will go to the city. At some point before, when gaining enough prosperity to the city, you'll be challenged by Greymon, who opens up a tournament area. And just like Greymon, once 50 prosperity is reached, Mameo will be attacked by Airdramon, who has been brainwashed by the analog human. He'll stay in Digimon's bed recovering, as you and your partner Digimon go within Infinity Mountain to find the culprit and save the island once and for all. Going through Infinity Mountain, there are new Digimon that we haven't seen before, one of them being yet another Digimon that was exclusive to this game. A green meshed golem Digimon called Rockmon has never been seen outside of the first Digimon World game, other than 2 card video games, but those don't really count. In Japanese, it was called Golemon, which would become an entirely different Digimon a year later. Mameo enters the center of Infinity Mountain, where he finds an adult middle-aged hacker known only as Analog Man. He has come to take over the digital world and shape it as he sees fit, and views Digimon as nothing more than programs to make his slaves. The final battle is with Analog Man's Machinedramon. That's right, Digimon World's final boss is a brand new Digimon new to the franchise, and a surprise reveal at the end of the game. No wonder it's considered fairly popular and is used throughout. In Japanese, its name is Mugendramon, with Mugen meaning eternity or infinite. As in, this is a perfect machine that has infinite power. Though after losing, he decides to obliterate the entire File Island with an explosion. This fails through the efforts of the Digimon Mameo is recruited through the game, and the explosion instead engulfs Analog Man before he can return to the real world, presumably killing him. Mameo returns to the real world with his task done, just in time for his mother to come home from work. His friends on the playground tease Mameo for reciting stories of his adventures in Digimon World, though acknowledge that he's somehow gotten a lot better at raising his Digimon in his pendulum. His partner Mameo pops out of the pendulum in a panic, informing Mameo that Analog Man has somehow returned, much to the shock of him, but more so his friends. Without hesitation, Mameo returns to the digital world, to face off against what appears to be the remnants of Analog Man's consciousness in a place called the Back Dimension, which appears randomly somewhere on the island, either Ogremon's Fortress, Grey Lord Mansion, or Ice Sanctuary. As the mansion requires virus types to enter and the sanctuary requires vaccines, if you can enter them without the required Digimon attributes, you know that it's the back dimension. From there, it's a couple of floors before you briefly see the materialized consciousness of the spiteful Analog Man and fight an even more powerful Machine Dramon. Once defeated, it turns back into a regular Digimon that Analog Man co-opted for this fight. If you return to the place where you fought Machine Dramon a second time, Digitamamon will be your final opponent of the game, and upon his defeat, will upgrade the restaurant a final time with the glitch that allows your Digimon to gain stats without getting full. Speaking of glitches, there are a whole bunch in this game, including a game-breaking glitch with Jiromon's jukebox, and one where you might possibly get stuck if you talk to one of the Mojimon without an autopilot. There are a total of 61 Digimon available to the player through hatching a Digi-Egg or Digivolution. A green egg hatched a Botamon that will digivolve to Koromon. That Koromon could branch off into either Agumon or Gabumon. A blue egg hatched Punamon that would digivolve to Tsunomon, which could become either Elecmon or Penguinmon. An orange egg hatched into Poyomon, digivolving into Tokomon, which would digivolve into either Patamon or Biomon. The pink egg would hatch into Uramon, and could digivolve to Tanamon, with Palmon and Betamon as digivolution options. With a special condition of having your in-training sleep underneath Kunamon's bed, your Digimon could digivolve into Kunamon. Agumon could branch off into Greymon, Marimon, Bergermon, Centaurumon, Monochromon, or Tyrannomon. Gabumon's tree branched with Centaurumon, Monochromon, Dromojimon, Tyrannomon, Ogremon, and Garurumon. Patamon's tree had it branching off into Dromojimon, Tyrannomon, Leomon, Angemon, and Unimon. Elecmon had a much smaller pool of champions, with Leomon, Angemon, Bakemon, and Kakatoriamon. Betamon's line was all water, with Seadramon, Waymon, Shellmon, and Sealamon. Penguinmon had a somewhat icy theme, with Waymon, Shellmon, Garurumon, Frigimon, and Mojimon. Kunamon's digivolutions were Bakemon, Kabuterimon, Kuwagamon, and Vegemon. Palmon digivolved into Kuwagamon, Vegemon, Ninjamon, Waymon, and Sealamon. Biomon digivolved into all flying Digimon with Bergermon, Airdramon, Kakatoriamon, Unimon, and Kabuterimon. The large champion pool could only digivolve into one or two ultimates each. This game also came out only shortly after the Mega level was introduced in the Pendulums, thus no Mega Digimon exist in the games. The Digimon that would eventually become Mega level featured in this game as ultimates included Phoenixmon, Hercules Kabuterimon, and that's it. Middle Greymon's prior forms were Greymon, Marimon, Monochromon, Dromojimon, or Tyrannomon. Skull Greymon's branches were Greymon, Divimon, Bakemon, Garurumon, and Mojimon. Giromon's branches were Centaurumon, Ogremon, Bakemon, and Unimon. Hercules Kabuterimons were Kuwagamon, Kabuterimon, or Shellmon. Metal Mamimon could come from Monochromon, Kabuterimon, Ninjamon, or Frigimon. Mega Seadramon's tree included Seadramon, Waymon, Shellmon, Sealamon, and Garurumon. Andramon's tree was Marimon, Centaurumon, Ogremon, Leomon, and Angemon. Megadramon's tree was Tyrannomon, Devimon, Airdramon, and Seadramon. Phoenixmon's tree had all winged Digimon with Bergermon, Angemon, Airdramon, Kakatoriamon, and Unimon. Piximon came from Kakatoriamon, Kuwagamon, Vegemon, and Ninjamon. Mamemon's branches were Leomon, Ninjamon, Waymon, Frigimon, and Mojimon. That ends the normal lines. Monzemon could only come from Numamon, which came from any Digimon that didn't meet requirements from other champions. Digitamamon could only digivolve from Nanimon, which can only be obtained if your Digimon was treated so poorly that both its happiness and discipline are at 0. Vetamon can only be gotten after your Digimon is a champion for 10 days and you scold and praise it a lot, meeting no other Digivolution requirements. Etamon is Sukamon's only path forward, and can only be obtained if you fill your Digimon's virus meter as mentioned earlier. Sukamon halves the stats of your Digimon, so it's best to transform it as soon as possible after hatching, and train it right away. Other methods of Digivolution were what I mentioned before as Slide Digivolution and Death Digivolution. Airdramon and Seadramon could digivolve into each other, and there was a small chance that some Digimon could digivolve instead of dying, into Bakemon for instance, or if it was an Angemon that died, it could digivolve into Devimon. Pendulum 3.0 contained the fearsome Nightmare Soldiers, beings that were mysterious, and many would come from unknown places or have mentions of other dimensions. The baby was Mokumon, who would digivolve into Demi-Meramon or Petit-Meramon. The vaccine rookie with 0 to 1 care mistakes was a Digimon called Bakumon, taking inspiration from the Japanese yokai, the Dream Eater Baku. As no child would understand this reference in the West, the name was changed to Tapirmon, though Baku is a word for tapir, so it could just be a direct translation. The data rookie was Candlemon or Candmon in Japanese. Like the others, you'd obtain it if you got between 2 to 4 care mistakes. The virus attribute was Demi-Devimon or Pico-Devimon, requiring at least 5 care mistakes. Tapirmon could digivolve into 8mon or Hanuman, its name being a pun on the Hindu god Hanuman. Actually, I really love this pun, but seeing as children's media in the West is very cautious about any sort of overt religious imagery a lot of the time, I can understand why it was changed. It would need 0 to 2 care calls and to be trained more than 25 times. Garurumon was Tapirmon's exclusive, requiring more than 3 care mistakes but training less than 30 times. Meramon also required 0 to 2 calls but trained less than 24 times. Wizardmon or Wizardmon was obtained with more than 3 care mistakes and training more than 30 times. Candlemon could also digivolve to 8mon with a stricter 0 to 1 call mistakes and training more than 30 times. Continuing on with the fire theme, Meramon would also need 0 to 1 calls but training fewer than 29 times. Wizardmon required at least 2 calls and training less than 29 times. Finally, Candlemon could also become Devimon with 2 or more calls and training more than 30 times. Demi-Devimon, on the other hand, if going for Meramon, would need 0 to 2 calls and training fewer than 29 times. Wizardmon would need at least 3 or more calls and training 25 times minimum. Devimon needed 0 to 2 mistakes and training 30 times, and Demi-Devimon actually gets an exclusive in Bakumon, requiring at least 3 care mistakes and training fewer than 24 times. Mammothmon would be obtained as the vaccine ultimate from 8mon and Garurumon, and required 2 or fewer calls, battling 30 or more times, and a win ratio of 40% or higher. Alternatively, you could always jogress your vaccine or data champion to get Were Garurumon. The data ultimate was Death Meramon, who digivolves from Meramon or Wizardmon with 4 or fewer care mistakes and battling 30 or more times and the standard 40% win ratio. Or you could jogress it into the similarly Halloween-themed Pumpkinmon or Pumpmon with vaccine or virus champions. For the virus grouping, we go into the anime big bads with Myotismon or Vamdemon, digivolving from Bakumon or Devimon at 1 care mistake or fewer in the same 30 battles and 40% win ratio. Jogressing a data or virus champion would give you Phantomon instead. Continuing with the spooky theme, Mammothmon and Death Meramon could further digivolve into Vaccine Mega Skull Mammothmon, needing perfect care and a 60% win ratio. Data Boltmon was obtained by jogressing Death Meramon and a 2nd Gen Data Ultimate or Pumpkinmon and 1st Generation Data Ultimate. And once again, continuing with more Digimon that appeared in the first anime as enemies, the Virus Mega was Piedmon or Paimon, jogressing from Myotismon or Phantomon with Virus Ultimates. I did say that many of these Digimon referenced another dimension, but I'll go more in depth about this in the next video. There were actually things that were Digimon related that came out in February and at the beginning of March, but I'm going to cut it off here and go a little bit back in time to talk about it at the beginning of the next video. This one is already quite long, and I decided to hate myself by giving myself a deadline of only 2 months for the editing, so I'm exhausted. I appreciate you coming along with me for this Digimon journey, and I also appreciate it if you watch to the end of my first long-form video. I apologize if my audio is everywhere. I changed through a lot of programs and electronics between recordings and re-recordings and finding my limits, and also difficulties recording through a record-breaking heatwave. Please tell me what you thought if you have personal experience with the fandom, or if you're someone who barely dealt with it, or if my little video is somehow your first foray into learning about the franchise. I'd love to know either way. Also, please like and subscribe so that I know that you're interested in this video. I mean, it's my passion project, so I do it anyways, but it'll be nice to know how my video is doing, and you can catch when I release the next videos in the series if you're subbed. If you like what I do, you can support me on Patreon and hang out with me on my Discord server where I'll be occasionally streaming games, including ones that I'll be playing for my next videos. You can eventually listen to my thoughts on movies I watch with my co-host Robbie on the Megaplex Rejects podcast whenever we get those out. It should be soon, but unfortunately working on this video halted recording for quite a number of weeks. Also, a big thanks to Mac over at Macabre Storytelling for helping me out with my audio. I really appreciate it. He does media crit and analysis and writing videos and occasionally dabbles in other topics of his interest, so if you like that stuff, I recommend his work. Also, thanks to Fat Men Falling for Bread. Huh? What? What's the matter? Well, I thought that was going to be obvious when I got to talking about the movies and shows in the second video. I guess you're right. Well, the whole point of the beginning was to emphasize a link between and the influences Digimon has from Kami, Yokai, and Kaiju. That Digimon was meant to be a Kaiju franchise. Don't believe me? All you have to do is listen to the opening of the first movie, Digimon Adventure.